And a pleasant good morning. Nope, it's afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. It's been a day already, Brian. I don't know about you, but it's been a day for me. But you know what? I'm at the best part of my day and the best part of my week, and that is the Friday Free for All mailbag. And I haven't said it in a long time, but this is my favorite day of the week, and I'm super fired up today to get into the questions that we have. And as a reminder to everyone, our new format for the Friday Free for All is the first hour is me and Brian, and we will take as many questions as we possibly can concerning the team. And then the second hour, starting at 1:30, is when our recruiting director, Ryan Roberts, will join Brian. And that is when the recruiting questions can be answered. So we will.
Although we'll probably still try to finish up with some team stuff if there's some really good questions there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's when we start to shift a little bit into recruiting. So we're starring all your recruiting questions now,
so that we have them for the next section.
Like we have a super chat from Demetrius Rex that is recruiting related. We appreciate that. We'll definitely get to that in the second hour of the show.
Absolutely. So Ryan, I say let's jump right in. Let's do it. Let's go right back up to the top. And Q Kibbs, here we go. Q Kibbs is jumping in with a Tyler Buckner question. Gotta love it. In the Buckner package this year, we saw a lot of this slow developing pseudo triple option. Personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. Will we move away from that as an offense opens up for TB12?
I think the biggest thing people have to understand is that Tyler Buckner ran a package this year,
right,
that was specific to using him as a change of pace to Jack Cohn. That has created a lot of misconceptions about Tyler Buckner and the offense that he will run if he's the full-time quarterback. Number one, that being he's going to be basically a triple option quarterback, essentially. You know, he's just runner, not really a passer, those kind of things. That's not accurate. I mean, every Notre Dame coach, every Notre Dame player has said, look, you see him in practice, this kid can throw, right? I mean, everybody says it. We've even seen some glimpses of it at Notre Dame this year. I mean, he threw for more yards as a freshman and had a higher completion percentage as a freshman than Bryce Young had as a freshman. I just continue to remind people of that. But what we saw this year with his package was unique to that aspect of it. Now, will we see some of that stuff when he's the full-time starter? Yeah, I do. I think you'd be foolish not to utilize his running. And that's not what Q Kibbs is saying. He's talking about specifically sort of like the power read, the read zone. Yeah, we'll see some of that stuff. I think the reason it stood out to you is because he did it so frequently when he was in the game. You'll still see him do that, probably do it the same amount that he did it this year. But when he's playing 60, 70, 75 snaps instead of 10, it'll just be spaced out a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, right.
But I don't know if we'll necessarily see a ton of design runs like we have before, like with the power reads and stuff like that. But I think we'll still see a lot of read zone. I think we'll still see a lot of, quarterback power, the power read, I should say, as kind of a wrinkle. We'll certainly see all that stuff. And that's stuff that, look, and this is the other thing too to consider is last time we saw Harry Hiestand coaching a Notre Dame offensive line, he was part of an offense that had a quarterback that rushed for over 800 yards. So you have an offensive line coach that knows how to, and I'm not saying Jeff Quinn didn't. This is just about the current offensive line coach. You have an offensive line coach that knows how to get a mobile quarterback running yards. We saw it with Brandon. We saw it with Deshaun Kaiser. We saw it with Malik Zaire. Little bit with Everett Golson. He was more of a scrambler than a designed runner guy. But for Harry Hiestand's last, 3 years at Notre Dame, he had guys that were, you were calling running plays for the quarterback.
Right.
And so he's going to have experience with that. And you'll still see that from Tyler. You'll also see some quick hitters. You'll see, and obviously a lot more throwing. So I would not look at what we saw this year and be like, that's what the offense is going to look like, unless the situation is Drew Pine wins the starting job and Tyler Buckner is still coming off the bench in a rotation role.
Right.
That's when it would make it would continue that at this point in time. But if he's the starting quarterback, you'll still see some of that stuff. You need to see some of that stuff. That stuff is good.
That's what makes him even more dynamic.
Well, it's not just about him, but it's about you're hitting with them hard inside zone. You're hitting with counters. You're hitting with buck sweeps. You need to have something as a package off of that. And that's what that that's what that does. And so certainly adds something.
I'm all
value.
about keeping defenses off balance and not being able to focus on one or two things, right? And that kind of an offense allows you to do that. So, I'm all for it. Again, you don't have to do that every play, but I still like it, and I still want it. I still want a lot of it. Okay, Scott Yerbick says, thoughts. What do you think could have been if John Gruden was hired back in 2000 or 2009? I've always wondered this. Thank you.
I have two strong thoughts on that. Number
Really?
one is I've never understood why Notre Dame fans were infatuated with John Gruden. I've
Just a name.
never quite understood that. The second part of it, I think John Gruden would have been a horrible college football coach. John Gruden is wicked smart. No one's ever questioned that.
Right.
John Gruden does not have the temperament to coach college kids. I don't think it's part of the reason I've said I would probably never coach high school. I don't know if I'm smart enough at being able to, or good enough, I should say, not smart enough, but good enough at being able to take what I know and taking it down to a level where
you're trying to say dumb it down.
No, because it's not dumbing it down. Right. It's about a different age group. I mean, a different age group is ready to handle certain things.
Sure.
14-year-olds
are different than 18-year-olds.
Right. And an 18-year-old senior in college or high school is going to be more prepared to handle calculus more often than not than a 14-year-old freshman. It's where you are in your development, and it's up to the coach to find out where that is and then build you up. I don't think I have that ability. And that's why I've always had a great deal of respect for high school coaches, because there's some really smart high school coaches that are like, I'd love to do that, but I teach 15-year-olds.
Right.
And
it's different. I mean, it's just a different ball of wax.
Yeah. I don't see John Gruden being able to do that at all. I think he still would have been very demanding of all those things, and it would have been a disaster. Plus, he's a pretty harsh guy. I mean, I've heard stories about him that be like, you're like Harry Heastan, like, boy, I can't go there. I mean, Harry Heastan would, maybe blush at some of the things I've heard about him. So I feel like it would be a disaster.
I feel like it would be similar also to what kept Charlie Weiss down.
But it'd been way worse. It'd have been way worse.
Yeah,
because Charlie was not as bad as and how he communicates to players.
Well, I'm referring more to the focusing just on the starters and not worrying about the depth and the building of
all the things that hurt Charlie would have also hurt Gruden.
Right,
that's teaching fundamentals.
Right, exactly,
all that stuff. But
he would have been all about the scheme.
I think it would have been worse.
Yeah,
it would have been worse than it was under Charlie.
Right.
I think it'd have been a very toxic environment because I think John Gruden's a very overrated coach. He's a good coach. I mean, guy won a Super Bowl. He won a Super Bowl with a team that was already pretty good that he inherited from Tony Dungy, for being honest.
No doubt.
Weren't they in the NFC Championship like the year before he got
They were
there?
really good. I
think they lost to the Rams the year before in the NFC Championship, like 14-7 or something like that. They had Sean King at quarterback. They went out and got Brad Johnson and, had a better quarterback and were able to win a Super Bowl. But
amazing.
He's a good coach, but I think he's more about hype and self-promotion than he is about substance to the level that should warrant people still talking about him all these years later. So, I love the question from Scott.
I think
that's been a topic of conversation for me in Notre Dame circles for 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's
like you said, all the way back in 2000, and 2002, and I think it was 2002 when they hired Ty is the first time I remember John Gruden's name coming up. Like, guy just won a Super Bowl. I don't think he's coming to Notre Dame.
Well, and his ties to Notre Dame are so small to me.
Wasn't his dad like a coach here?
Dad was an assistant, so he went to Clay High School in town. But I can tell you right now, from having coached at Clay at one point, he doesn't give a rip about Clay High School. I mean, I know for a fact that Clay had reached out to him, just when they were remember the golden football thing that they were doing back in the day, where if you were a Super Bowl winning coach or a player, you got a football to take back to your high school.
Okay.
And the football was sent to Clay, but didn't have John Gruden attached to it. You know what I mean? Gotcha. Like, he didn't come back and present that ball. Like, it was this whole thing. Anyway, bottom line is the connection to Notre Dame is very, very slim. And therefore his connection to where he went to high school here is also very, very slim and small.
Right.
So, anyway,
right.
I digress. Sean Green. as our next one. And I think this is a very interesting one as well. Do you think we were aggressive enough in the portal? I know we're up against the scholarship limit and prefer not to take on mercenaries, but there's some positions that could have used some help this year.
I would like to remind people, and this, Sean, this is a perfect question. This is not a negative response. This is just I'm just laying out the facts. The majority of the transfers that Notre Dame has landed over the years have been grad transfers, but they've happened late, right? They got Nick McLeod in May. I think they got, if I remember correctly, didn't they get Cody Riggs relatively late in the process as well?
I believe so. He was a kind of a surprise, wasn't he?
Kane Madden didn't commit to Notre Dame till like a month before the camp started.
Because you and I were deep into that one. Yeah,
right.
I remember that. Yeah.
Notre Dame is not in a situation yet, and I think they're working on it, where they're going to be able to go out and just have much success recruiting transfers. And I'm going to try my best to explain why that is. Basically, the department heads at Notre Dame determine the curriculum that's accepted for their degrees. This isn't an admissions department decision. The admissions department takes what guidelines they're given, and then they apply them towards people who apply to the school, transfers, undergrads, and prep school kids, and high school kids. The schools determine this is what we accept, this is what will transfer, all these type of things. For whatever reason, the department heads at Notre Dame have created these insanely difficult and insanely strange standards for what they'll accept to transfer over. It's almost impossible to get your right now to get your transcripts to come over. It's very, very difficult.
Yes.
Notre Dame had to beg, basically. The football program had to really push to get Brandon Joseph over from Northwestern.
Yeah, and they have very specific prerequisites for their transfers as well. So you're talking classes that have to transfer over and be approved, and then also,
and they're just not being approved, and that's the point. And what you could normally do is you can take certain classes, like if you took a class towards your major, and they don't accept it, you can just apply it towards a gen ed. Right. But you can only have so many gen eds in your transcript. Right. You don't graduate with gen eds. That only happens in Michigan. They have gen education there. Notre Dame doesn't have gen ed as a major, and so you may transfer or major in sociology, and then you want to transfer Notre Dame and major in sociology, but they won't take this course, and this course because it's not identical to the one they have. It's incredibly arbitrary and
it's very difficult. Yeah,
the baseball team, I was told by a good source, lost an undergrad transfer they wanted from Harvard because they wouldn't take him. I think I mentioned that in the show before. So the reality is you could say, hey, look, they need to go out there and try to find those kids. But when you know that the odds of you getting a kid into school are slim to none, you're going to be super picky about who you even try. Right. Because otherwise you're wasting time. So like if a certain kid comes available, let's just say Josh Downs from North Carolina, somebody who there's been some rumblings that he may, transfer somewhere for his final season. Would I kick the tires on that? Absolutely. You have to, but the next 5 receivers on the board, probably not, because I know I'm not getting them into school, right? I'll have one of the assistants kind of do a transcript request, and then you get the transcripts and you're like, yep, this ain't happening. And it's not that the kid's not a good student. It's just, the uphill battle you're fighting. So that's why Notre Dame's focus on transfers will probably continue to be mostly about grad transfers, and they've gotten 2 grad transfers already, one from Harvard, one from Arkansas State. It's easier to get kids in. It's easier to get kids in as high school people. It's easier to get kids in as grad transfers. Much, much, much easier than it is. So if you're Notre Dame, why would you invest all that time in when most likely you're not going to get it? The second piece of this, and I'll say this again, what y'all have to understand, and this is going to continue to be a problem for Notre Dame because, again, Notre Dame follows the rules. They just do. It's demanded of them. Most of these kids jump in the portal kind of having an idea where they're going. Like, does anyone think that Mario Williams jumped in the portal and let's see who wants to recruit me? No, he jumped in the portal. He had already kind of you knew he was going to be going to USC. And so sometimes kids will jump into, and I'm talking about the big name kids. I'm not talking about some of these other kids. Those kids are actually kind of getting the shaft because they're jumping in thinking people are going to recruit them when in reality, you're not the kind of kid I'm I'm going to use a scholarship on for a kid that's only got 2 years, right? So they end up having to transfer to a school that's already at the level that they're transferring from. Most of these big-time kids have a pretty good idea where they're going once they jump in the portal.
Right.
Now, it may be a good idea in 2 or 3 schools they like, but they're usually not just going into it blind, which is why so often within a week of these kids being in the portal, they've already announced where they're going.
Yep.
You think that kid got 7 visits in the 5 days it took him between jumping in the portal and making his commitment?
Most likely 0 visits. I mean, honestly,
like maybe like 1 or 2, but more often than not, it's not the case. So that's the other thing is, look, I could jump in on these kids, but then you make the calls and you're like, yeah, he's going to, like I said, I did this with Jahmyr Gibbs. As soon as he got in the portal, I called some people I knew, like, yeah, he's going to Alabama. That's been done for months. Okay. What can you do about that? So it's just, I know people want to see Notre Dame getting involved in the portal. It's just not going to be something they do often. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I recruit high school kids.
Right.
Like develop high school kids. Now there's a time and a place to kind of go get a kid like a Jack Cohn and a Cody Riggs and guys like that. But
Brandon Joseph, I mean, he's
Brandon Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just, those guys they're going to be rare, and they're going to be because you're just looking at your upcoming roster and you have holes. I don't want to see Notre Dame getting into that habit of taking a bunch of grad transfers. That's lazy. It's not the best thing for Notre Dame because those transfers are going to then have to make the academic acclimation in Notre Dame. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. They don't get the acclimation period like the high school kids do. And I'd still think prep is the best way to go for Notre Dame, with the occasional year or two, like meaning a kid has a year or 2 left of a hole filler, like a Jack Cohn, like a Brandon Joseph, and honestly, Kane Madden I wouldn't have been as upset about getting Kane Madden if Harry Hiestand was a coach.
Sure.
Because I felt like, okay, Hiestand's going to be able to, utilize certain things from him, and I don't think he would have been necessarily guaranteed a starting spot. But that's kind of how I view that whole thing.
Well, and just one more little piece of this, I do know for a fact, or at least it was like this when I was in college. If you were going to transfer into Notre Dame from your freshman year, so as a sophomore transfer, you already had to have calculus in the bag. You had to have calculus. So if you hadn't taken calculus in high school or as a freshman in college, they weren't even looking at you. I mean, you could not transfer over. So just backing up the point that it's very, very difficult to transfer over to
they will
Notre
give
Dame
guys more options to take that. Like they'll say, hey, if you're going to be coming in the spring, take it here. Or if you're going to be coming in the fall,
right?
We need, so that's the one class that they'll at least with some kids work on.
Yeah.
If that's the only thing they're missing.
It's tough.
But the reality is you never get there. I mean, you hardly ever get to that point.
Right.
So
exactly.
When Notre Dame's football staff has to kind of push to get a transfer from Northwestern,
right,
who supposedly was a really good student at Northwestern, now I do believe, and again, I don't know this for a fact. I've been told this by a couple people now, that they're working to try to get some of this changed. And there are some departments that are going to be, you're going to need to push more for, because the departments that more of your players are going to be going into. But will they change or not? I don't know. But
it's going to be an uphill battle.
They're trying.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're Notre Dame's football team, say, listen, we're not going to bring you some kid with a 2-1. Okay, we're not going to do that. But if we bring you a kid that's showing that he can handle the course load, work with us here. You know what I mean? Like, work with us on trying to get this kind of kid into school. He clearly has showed and displayed that he can be a key part of what we're doing here, and he can handle the academic course load. I think that's the kind of exception that Notre Dame needs to make. Those are the exceptions that I think you fight for, not, hey, let us get the 2-0 into school, or let us get the kid that, barely got his SATs or ACTs or GPAs, barely, NCAA clearinghouse, because that kid's more likely than not going to struggle at Notre Dame. As long as they're bringing kids that you think can handle the course load, then I'm okay kind of going that route. We got a super chat here I want to get to. It says, speaking of Buckner, I've noticed that his shoulder pads seem bigger than a lot of QBs we've seen. Is that because he runs the ball so much? David, I honestly can't tell you that. I can't answer that because I've never paid attention to that. And Yeah, I really couldn't tell you that. I haven't noticed that. I'll go back and watch the film later. I appreciate the super chat. I'm not ducking your question. I just never really noticed that, never really paid attention to that. So normally I see things like that, but I definitely didn't notice that. I want to make a comment here real quick. I'm seeing people asking about things that were posted on the message board that were like intel features and recruiting features. Look, those are things we want to keep on the premium message board, and there's a reason we put them on the premium message board. And so I would appreciate when we have those kind of intel pieces and those kind of recruiting scoops like we had on Christian Gray, that people don't run to Twitter with it, that people don't do the chats with it, that you keep it on the premium message board. That's my request to all of you. I would really appreciate that very much. And so I'm not going to address the Kerry Cooks things that are being brought up right now. If I think you'll understand that. All right, here we go. Scott Yerbick says, do you think we will ever see a two-way player, or those days long gone? I think we'll see two. I mean, we've seen two-way players relatively recently. I don't think we'll see two-way players in that guys that are like playing two ways all the time. But I think we'll see a DB that gets some snaps on offense, or a receiver that gets some snaps in the secondary. I think we will see that. Pardon me. Sean Green asks, do you think Heastan keeps Alt at left tackle and Fisher at right tackle, or does he swap them? I personally would leave them the way that they are. I mean, if he swaps them, he swaps them. I don't think there's a wrong answer there. I think Alt is a more natural pass blocker, and Fisher is the better all-around blocker. And what I mean by that is, like, to me, I've just kind of always felt like you really want a great pass blocker at left tackle. Well, I think Blake Fisher and Joe Alt are both really, really good pass catchers or pass blockers. So I don't think that's necessarily a big concern for me. I think, however, when I look at Blake, I see a guy that is a really dominant two-way player, meaning run and pass game. Joe has potential in the run game, but he's more of a technician in the run game. Blake is a mover. And when he gets coached up, he's going to be a mover. And I just kind of like the idea of having a right tackle that is just a guy that can punish you in the run game. That's my personal preference. I really like the idea of that. And it's not that I don't think Blake Fisher could be a great left tackle. We're going to do a show on this next week because we're getting a lot of this, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions from people. Say, well, Blake Fisher needs to be at left tackle because he's the team's best left tackle, and that's fine. He's the team's best left tackle. He's the team's best right tackle. He's the team's best left guard. He's the team's best right guard. I mean, Blake Fisher is an elite talent. He could be their best player no matter where he plays. Just like Quentin Nelson could have been Notre Dame's best right tackle if he wanted to be, if they wanted to keep him there in college. But it's about getting your best five. And if your second best lineman is also a left tackle, and he doesn't project to be as good somewhere else as Blake Fisher is at right tackle, then your best option is saying Blake at right and Joe at left. So That's something that's got to be considered. People have to be willing to look at that and understand that it's going to be a little bit of a. It's not when we talk about moving Blake, it's not that Blake can't be a great left tackle. It's about what's the best five-man rotation going to be.
And that's why I'm so excited about Harry Heastan, because he's always been so good at getting the five best guys on the field and putting them in the place that they're going to be the most successful at Notre Dame, right? I mean, at Notre Dame, it's not even necessarily what's going to help them in the future. Right. Not that, again, not saying that he's not trying to help them in the future. That's not what I'm getting at all.
He'll do that. That's why he moved Mike McGlinchey to left tackle in 2016. It was about, look, we're going to help. But it's not – part of that was when Mike McGlinchey was starting at left tackle, he had Alex Bars opposite him. Alex wasn't a top 15 NFL draft pick kind of guy, right? Like Joe Alt has first-round potential.
Correct.
He's got a long way to go. He's a freshman, but he's got that potential. It's a little different. And Alex was probably a little bit more of a natural interior player, as we saw. I mean, he was pretty good at right tackle in 2016. He was even better at guard in 15 and 17.
Right.
And 18. And so it's a little different situation. But, we saw Ronnie Stanley playing right tackle when he was in the starting lineup with Zach Martin. Well, I mean, you could have made a case that Zach Martin could have moved some. I mean, look what he did in the pros. He moved
Yeah,
the guard.
exactly. That was
I mean,
going to be my
it's
exact
about getting
example.
your best five,
Right.
right? And that's the important thing. Get your best five on the field. And
Because good NFL evaluators can tell whether you're going to, your footwork, all of the
right.
different things that they look for, they can tell.
Quentin Nelson was drafted just as high as Ronnie Stanley as a guard. Ronnie Stanley's a left tackle, premium O-line position. He was drafted number 6 overall, same spot as Quentin Nelson. And let's be honest, if Laramie Tunsil doesn't have that stupid mask bong thing happen right before the draft, he's picked ahead of Ronnie Stanley.
That's right.
Everyone projected him to be picked ahead of Ronnie Stanley, which means Ronnie would have fallen to like 9 or 10. He was like 8 to 12 is kind of where I think he was projected.
Forgot about that thing.
Yeah, and so it took that for Ronnie Stanley, a left tackle, to be drafted as high as Quentin Nelson, a guard.
Right.
And not just like a guard in the pros like Zach Martin, because Zach Martin was a left tackle in college. He was drafted to be a guard, but he was a left tackle in college. Quentin was a guard his entire – I mean, he played tackle as a freshman as a redshirt. He didn't play, but he was a tackle like when he first arrived, and then they quickly moved him to guard, and he played left guard his whole career. So it's about getting your best five on the field and then finding out where that five fits the best. And that doesn't always mean your 5 most talented kids are on the field together. Is if your 5 most talented kids, none of them can play center, you got to find somebody to play center.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right? Or if your 5 best players are all centers and none of them can play tackle, then your 5 most talented guys aren't going to be on the field together.
Right.
There's got to be some nuance there that people have to understand. But yes, and honestly, but at the end of the day, Sean, I don't think it necessarily is. It's a win-win.
Right.
I don't think like if they flip the 2, I'm gonna be terrible decision by Coach Easton. Should have left Joe Wall at left tackle. I won't say that, right? I personally think I'd leave Joe at left tackle and I'd leave Blake at right tackle for the reasons I mentioned, which is it's better for the entire unit that way. But if they decide, hey, look, let's move Blake to left and whatever, and maybe it's just because Blake's not going to be happy at right tackle, or he doesn't want to move positions, and you got to keep him happy. I mean, I don't love that, but that's the world we live in now.
It is,
unfortunately. Yeah. So so the point is, if I was dead set against it, I'd say no, don't move them. But if it's like whatever, it's like flip of a coin. They'll both be good at both. I just think Blake would be phenomenal at right tackle as well as phenomenal at left tackle. I don't think Joe would be as effective at right tackle as he would be at left tackle. That's what it comes down to for me at this point in time. But there's not. No matter where you start Blake Fisher, he's going to be your best, most talented lineman next year. It doesn't matter. But how do you fit the pieces around him? That's going to be a bigger question.
That's absolutely accurate. Yep.
Here we go. Here's a question to ask Vince.
All right. Jacob Hayden says, Brian, you've mentioned before that Tobias is a very advanced high school receiver. Do you think they will get him on the field early this season, even without being an early enrollee? Well, the numbers help, obviously, but his talent is even more prolific than the lack of numbers, I would say. I think he's going to get every opportunity to be on the field.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't care if you had 9, 10 receivers coming back. You've got to find a way to get Tobias Merriweather on the field. He's too good not to play. Even if it's just like what we talked about with Jordan Johnson. Look, I understood that Jordan Johnson wasn't as advanced as people thought, and he had some. But just give him 5 to 10 snaps a game. Let him get his feet wet. Let him see how he handles it. And then if he doesn't handle it well, then you take him back out. If he handles it well, then you keep giving him more. Guy like Tobias has to play. You got to find a role for him. And now, again, there's always the caveat that Tobias has to put the work in the spring, and he's got to put the work in the summer and all that kind of stuff. But but what I don't want to hear is, he hasn't picked up the playbook yet. I do not want to hear that crap ever
again. That is the
again.
worst excuse on the planet for a receiver.
If he can only run 3 routes, then put him in the game and let him run those 3 routes.
Right, exactly.
And if he can't, and like the thing is people say, well, you can't pick he doesn't have to know a lot of routes. It's not necessarily about that. It's about putting him in and when concepts are calling for the stuff that he knows, right? So it's not so much about he knows how to run a go, he knows how to run a hitch, a slant, and out, but it's about knowing that he's supposed to run that route then, right? And those are the things that I look at and say, hey, look, if you can't get him going on 3, 4, 5 routes and plays then you're not doing your job right. Because there's not a kid that gets into Notre Dame that's not smart enough to learn 5 or 6 concepts. There's just not. Even if it's just all you do is quick game with them. Hey, man, all you're doing is look screens, hitches, slants, and out. I don't care. Just get it, and then he can run a go, right? I mean, you can teach that kid enough stuff. And here's the other thing. Give him a wristband that tells him exactly, hey, when they do this, you're running this.
Yes.
You line him up at one spot until he gets that down, right? Have one of your other receivers look at him and tell him what to flip and do. I don't care.
Doesn't matter. You need his talent on the field, and you need to get the ball in his hands, period. There's ways good coaches get their best players on the field.
This is college football. This isn't the NFL where, you know, you expect the level of you got to know this. Tobias is going to be 18 years old. I don't expect him to be a grand wizard of playbook mastery when he arrives as a freshman. That's your job as the coach that makes 6 figures to coach that kid up and get him ready to play because he's that good. And that's Tobias. Now, I think Tobias is a pretty sharp kid. I think he will pick things up relatively quickly. So that rant was more of a bigger picture issue moving forward that I'm hoping Coach Stuckey changes. And Coach Reese as well, because, I mean, if the offensive coordinator is unwilling to work with a young kid, say we're going to call when he's in the game, we're going to call what he knows, then it doesn't matter what the receiver coach does. And I think that's been an issue in the past just as much as the receiver coach not coaching young kids. That's been a problem, but it's also been the system problem, which, look, again, you got to adjust that. If you want to recruit big-time receivers, you've got to get these kids on the field.
Yes.
When you do get big-time receivers. And Tobias Merriweather is a big-time player.
And again, good coaches get their best players on the field, period. I've said that forever. There are ways to get your best players on the field. You need to figure out how to do it. That's your job as a coach, is to get the best players on the field. And I'm obviously not talking about if they've got issues off the field or any of that. I'm just talking about from a football standpoint, your job is to coach the kids up and get your best players on the field to help you win, period. If you can't do that, well, then we got to find somebody who can. And this is not directed at Chancey Stuckey or anybody else. It's just as a football coach, as a coach in any sport, your job is to get your best players on the field. If you can't do that, then you got to find somebody else who can. Now, that's where I stand on that. We got a super chat from Leonidas Spartan Kick.
That's Tommy Guns, by the way.
I know. I recognize the emoji, or the avatar. But thank you for the super chat. Happy Friday, everyone. I'm a little late today. It's cold as hell in Iowa. I can imagine because that's probably that's a little north of we're 19 here. So it's not exactly a heat wave, but it certainly feels that way compared to Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Another super chat from Christopher Moore. Thank you very much. With Lance Taylor leaving, who do you think will communicate with the offense on the field during games? And does that affect the offense on game days?
I mean, it'll probably be, I would imagine Coach Stuckey will be down there on the field. He was at Baylor. Receiver coaches sometimes are down there. I was up in the box as receivers coach, but that was just my role.
It just depends on what your specific role is. Like sometimes receivers coaches are in charge of the pass game, and when being up in the booth, to me, it's much more helpful if you're trying to help call the
Whenever I was in the booth, it was because our offensive coordinator was on the field.
Okay, gotcha. So you were the eyes.
Yeah, exactly. With Tommy Reese up in the booth, Tommy Reese is seeing all that big picture stuff. You don't necessarily need Coach Stuckey down there. Now I would imagine the running backs coach will do it. I don't, and again, I don't think it was just Lance Taylor that communicated with the offense. I mean, you'd see Jeff Quinn going out there because what a lot of times you'll see them do is they'll kind of come together and then Lance Taylor's there, but then the other coaches are kind of with their position groups on the outside. Sure. So whether it's Lance Taylor, whether it's Chancey Stuckey, the new running backs coach, or John McNulty, who was up in the booth last year, I'm curious if they move him at all, but I think Tommy Reese likes having him up there beside him. So, at the end of the day, like I've said before, I don't think that stuff matters as far as who it is. It's just find someone that can do that job, Christopher, because I think it's a good question. I love the fact that Christopher's not talking about who's going to coach technique, who's going to recruit. I love the fact that he's getting into the details of who's going to communicate on. I mean, that's the stuff I love about our
Well, and
community.
it's an underrated thing that
Yeah,
people don't
I mean,
understand, that
really diving into the minutia of the
you
game,
need good
man. Yeah,
communication
I love
on
it.
game day, and there's coaches out there that don't practice that. You know what I mean? Like, they don't take that as a serious thing, and it could mean the winning and losing of a game if you
Yeah.
can't get a play communicated in time, and the
Yeah.
communication, all these different
Yeah,
things,
I
right?
love the question.
Yeah.
My thing is, it doesn't matter who it is. It just
Yes.
it just as long as it's getting communicated.
Right.
The communication aspect is important. That's the important part of your question. And I think they'll find someone. I'm not worried about them finding someone. It's just it's hard for me to say who it's going to be because I don't know who the running backs coach is going to be yet.
Sure.
And until
Sure.
that, it's going to be hard for me. If it's someone that's got a connection to Reese McNulty or someone that's got a unique background like a Lance Taylor that's coached the pass game and the run game.
Sure.
It could be that person. It could be Stuckey. It could, I mean, who knows? That's what I say is like, let me see what the whole staff looks like first, and then we can kind of get into what the different options are. But I do like the idea of I would actually like to see Coach McNulty down in the field more. I think the fact he's been a coordinator before, he's a veteran guy. I think that he seems to be kind of a calm dude. Right, like you've seen him at practice, Vince. I haven't, but just in the interactions I've seen, he seems to be a pretty
Just
calm
a
guy.
veteran,
Yeah,
calm presence.
Lance was a
Opinion.
real
Yeah.
calm guy,
Yes,
and that's
I
what I
agree with
think
that
was
too.
good about having Lance Taylor be that voice. Is you want a guy that's like, okay, we're fine, let's communicate. Right, you don't want that real intense motivational speaker guy because the whole time he's like ranting and raving about like getting fired up. It's like, hey, buddy, we need to get a call in. You know,
Right, exactly.
And I think it's good.
We've
Hey, when
all
you come
seen both coaches.
right, when you come to the
Yeah.
sideline, have some poise to you, right?
Yes.
And say what needs to be said to your players to get it
Poise
done.
is a good word. There's many unpoised coaches out there. I'll just leave it at that. John A1, based on players reaching their ceilings, what would the highest ceiling 22 offensive line starting five be?
Oh, I mean, that offensive line won't look like what the offensive line is going to look like. Because honestly, it's going to include some freshmen. I mean, Billy Schrouth to me has got a high ceiling. I mean, Emil Wagner has one of the 5 to 8 highest ceilings on the offensive line. But right now, you can't even see his ceiling yet. He's so far down on the floor because of his body type. So, I mean, and honestly, John, it's hard for me to say that one because there's so many kids with high ceilings that haven't tapped into that potential yet. The ones we can say for sure, Rocco, Blake. No, I'm not Rocco. I'm sorry. Joe Alt, Blake, Jarrett Patterson for sure.
Yes, those are the three.
Billy Schrouth for sure for me. Rocco's in that conversation for me, along with Joey Tanona. I think I like a lot. I think Ty Chan has a very high ceiling, very low floor. Tosh Baker's got to be in that conversation for me. He's a guy that I'm really curious to see how he develops under Harry Hiestand.
He is a giant wild card for me right now because I think at the moment he's underperformed where we thought he might be by this point. But you bring in Harry Hiestand, who's a completely different coach. I'm very curious to see what Tosh Baker can do because if he starts to reach his potential, well, now you've got some interesting decisions to make about where guys go and all of those different things. So to me, Tosh Baker is one of the biggest wild card / question marks for me on the offensive line going into 22 with the new coach. I'm very interested to see where things go with him.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of into the spirit of John's question. That's why Tosh needs to be in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you don't do starting lineup space. And that's not I'm not pushing back on John's question. I'm just making the point that like obviously you don't make starting lineups based on your 5 most talented guys.
Right.
It's your 5 best guys. And part of being best is experience, technique, knowing the system, that kind of stuff. So the most talented guy is not always the best guy.
Right.
In the starting lineup. And so that'll kind of reach part of it too. And then if you wanted to say, okay, of the guys, the highest ceilings for 2022, that might be a little bit of a different conversation. Right.
Sure.
And that's why I've always said, like, let's say Tosh Baker has a phenomenal offseason And it's like, this kid's our third best offensive lineman. I mean, this kid's phenomenal, but he's not better than Joe Alt, and he's not better than Blake Fisher.
Right.
You're not moving Tosh Baker to guard. I don't think you move Joe Alt to guard. So if you're unwilling to move Blake Fisher, if he's unwilling to move, then you have to admit that we're not getting our best players on the field.
Yeah.
We're not getting our best five is not getting on the field because you don't want to move a kid, this kid doesn't fit, or that kid doesn't want to move. And that's what's going to make it very, very interesting. But Tosh has got a long way to go before he's going to be in that conversation.
Sure.
And that's kind of what I want to see.
John with another question. Could Audric Estime be a better complement to Tyree in 22?
Better than Logan Diggs?
I think that's what he's saying.
I think they're very similar. I think Estime and Logan Diggs are a lot more similar in style than people realize. Estime was not I think there's this thought that because of how Audric Estime looks, that he's just
just like a bowling
he's Christian
ball.
Okoye, right?
Yeah,
like that's not his game. He's got very nimble feet. He was good at making people miss. He averaged over 10 yards a carry as a senior in high school. And he had a brilliant senior season. And we saw in the one game he got carries, like, oh, this cat's got some agility now.
Got some juice to him, yeah.
Yeah, and then he can run you over. So I personally want to see all three of them play.
Yes,
I do.
I think you need a three.
And I think you got two types of backs. You've got Audric Estime and Logan Diggs over here that are sort of the bigger bodied, but quick feet, can do stuff in between the tackles, can pass block. And then over here, you've got two explosive players in Chris Tyree and Jadarian Price.
Right.
I think you got a really nice complement in your backfield. And there's four kids that can flat out play, in my opinion. Jadarian might need a year to work his way up the depth. Not need a year to be ready to play, but there's three pretty good players ahead of him.
Yeah.
He might need a year to work up the depth chart, barring injury. But I want to see all three of them, and I think those two guys, Logan and Audric, complement Chris Tyree really well. Here's a stat for you, Vince, that's going to be in an article here soon, okay? So what I did the other day was I went and did some research, and I had Andrew McDonough, who wrote the Big Ten feature and has done some really good stuff for me on the site. I think he does great research. Like, he's a Notre Dame grad, so he's really smart. He does great research, and I had him help me put this together. And so what we did was we looked at 20-plus yard runs, and then I looked at, I took some Pro Football Focus data because, again, I told you their data collection is really good, and I compared the running back only production. I compared the designed run production, so like takeaway scrambles and sacks, and compared that to what we've seen from Jeff Quinn, and then what we saw at Harry Hiestan's last 4 years. And it was some really interesting stuff. And then the last thing we did was I just felt like Notre Dame didn't rip off a lot of big runs the last 4 years. I mean, they have some here and there, and Tony Jones had one in a big game, and Kyron had one last year, and 90-plus yard, but it just wasn't a lot. And so is it a perception thing, or is that a reality? So we went and looked from 17 to 14 to 17, despite fewer total carries. Notre Dame had 101 runs of at least 20 yards during Harry Hiestan's last 4 years, which included the 2014 season when they weren't very good at running the football, if you'll remember.
Yeah.
And then from 18 to 21, Jeff Quinn's 4 years, they had 83. So it's 18 more runs of 20 yards or loss. Here's where it gets real different, though. Runs of 50 yards or more. From 14 to 17, Notre Dame had 25 runs of at least 50 yards. In the last 4 years at Notre Dame, they've had 12. They had 3, 3, 3, and 3. And Hiestan 1 year had 11. They had 7 another year. They had 25 runs of 50 yards or more. And a big part of that was kind of like what we showed in the film with Alex yesterday, is the way that they were running the blocking schemes. They were able to get bigger holes, and they had a mobile quarterback then. Now, Ian Book was a mobile quarterback in the pass game.
Right.
They hardly ever used Ian in the run game, and they almost never had him run read zone, right? You're going to have that with Tyler Buckner. So that it's not just Harry Hiestan's better than Jeff Quinn. I think he is, but we also have to be honest and objective and not just look for any chance we can have to take a shot at Jeff Quinn. It's Jeff Quinn's had pretty much the same quarterback in his 4 years, and it's been Ian Book and Jack Cohn. Well, there's never been that read zone, power read threat.
That's true.
Right? And yet with Tyler Buckner, you have that threat. Not only can he rip off some of those runs, because a chunk of those runs were by quarterbacks. They weren't just from running backs.
Sure. Yeah,
Deshaun
right.
Kaiser had a couple. I mean, remember, he had like a 75-yard touchdown run against Temple in 2015, if you remember. Brandon Wimbush had 260-plus. I think he had 260-plus. No, Adams had 260-yard runs against BC. Brandon had another one, if you remember that game. So some of those are quarterback runs, like designed quarterback runs. Ian Book wasn't doing that. Almost all of Ian's yards came on scrambles in the pass game. And Jack Cohn obviously didn't do any of that. So that factored in too. So when you talk about the improved run blocking, which we think that there will be, combined with having a quarterback that is a dual threat guy and can actually be a run game addition,
right?
That's where you start to see some of those big plays open up. And I think that you want to have that explosive Chris Tyree aspect in there. And we've talked about, really utilizing that properly and not just having him go east-west. Use him east-west, but then also find ways to get him going right through those A gaps and B gaps, on the read zone stuff. Because
you can't be afraid to make your quarterback go between the tackles. If
he's
going to be a runner, then he's going to be a runner.
But I mean, what I'm visioning is like if you're running an inside zone with Chris Tyree and you're running read zone, and that backside, that will linebacker's got to determine whether, because remember, that's what teams are doing. They were trying to crash the end and then loop the will backer. Well, Notre Dame can easily handle that action with the read zone, and Chris Tyree gets through there. You can always put a tight end backside, which then widens the end out. And then, you're basically saying, will linebacker, if you fold over, then Chris Tyree gets to that first hole. There's nobody there.
Right.
And that's what was happening in 17 is, you're trying to play these games to try to defend Brandon Wimbush on the keep. And you forgot about Josh Adams running through the middle, or Dexter Williams, or Deion. It didn't matter who they put in running back.
If you take away that second level, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, Josh Adams' yards per carry that year was kind of nuts. It was really impressive. And he was 6. I'm looking it up now. He was like over 6. He was at 6.9. But doesn't even come close to what Dexter Williams was that year on 39 carries. Dexter was at 9.2. Deion McIntosh was a 5.7.
Yeah.
Deion McIntosh. And so, I mean, that's what you get when A, you have a great line, B, a great line coach, and C, a quarterback that's a legitimate run threat. Now, that also means having a complementary situation in the backfield too, which goes back to the question, which I think is going to be really fun to watch, because you're hitting them with the elusiveness of Logan Diggs and Audric Estime, and then the size of Logan Diggs and especially Audric Estime, and then you complement that with just the sheer dynamic speed that Chris Tyree brings to the table. That's a really tough group to handle. Oh, and by the way, your quarterback's a legit 4.6 and a dynamic runner.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
and use them to your advantage.
Good luck with that.
I mean, exactly. Make defenses guess and then make them wrong. Right. I mean, that's the whole point of offense. So either way, they're going to have the weapons to do that.
Yep.
Jojo, what's up, Jojo? He says, good afternoon, IB Nation. Any news on the running back coach? And it sounds like Al Golden might be the DC and the linebacker coach. The more I read the piece, Brian, on him and what he brings with his wealth of knowledge, I like.
I would strongly discourage people from assuming that they know who the defensive coordinator is going to be. There's this thought, and it may end up being Al Golden.
Yeah, right.
But he hasn't decided. Coach Freeman has not decided yet. The thought is, and this is what happens, right? This is what happens on Facebook and Twitter and message boards. That people start thinking they're going to try to connect the dots, right? And it's just no. So here's how it's going. Well, Al Golden is still in the playoffs. They don't want to announce. It might be a while. So that means Notre Dame is waiting on Al Golden to be done with the playoffs before they announce him as the head coach, as the defensive coordinator. No. Kansas City Chiefs are still in the playoffs. Their linebackers coach, same position as Al Golden, accepted the defensive coordinator job at LSU a month ago. It's two different organizations. You can't accept a job necessarily in college football and then do multiple things. There's no reason. Charlie Weiss was the head coach at Notre Dame the entire time he was in the postseason trying to win a Super Bowl. I mean, we've heard about those stories.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
There's one reason that Marcus Freeman has not announced his new defensive coordinator, and it is not because he's waiting on the Bengals to be done with their season. It's because he hasn't decided who that's going to be. And reason number one, he's got some pretty good candidates on the board. Reason number two, he's being very thorough because that's his baby. And when it's your baby, defense is his baby. That person is replacing him as defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. He's going to be real picky on who that's going to be.
Rightfully so.
Right. Number three, right now he is out on the road recruiting like a champ. I mean, he is going crazy on the recruiting trail.
No doubt.
That's his number one priority right now because there is no rush. There's no signing day coming up. Mario Cristobal has been at Miami how long? Like over a month. He hasn't hired coordinators yet. Signing day for Notre Dame is not a factor in February.
Right. Not
if
anymore.
they sign a guy, it's going to be a running back, and I don't think they're going to sign anyone. They're done on defense. There's no rush. Spring practice doesn't start till March. We're not even to February yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give it another week or two. Right. And there's going to be – because what happens is the signing day is next week.
Right.
They can get out on the road and go see kids. When that dead period starts around signing day, that's when he's in the office and he can focus on those things.
Yep.
Which starts this week, right? I mean, he's going to be doing.
You don't get
this
open period of recruiting,
right?
Like you have to strike while the iron's hot.
Yes,
and he is. Yeah,
right. And if some of these coaches aren't willing to wait, that's okay. They didn't really want this job, and this part is 100% my opinion. The other stuff I've told you is intel. This part's 100% my opinion. I kind of feel like if I'm the head coach of Notre Dame, I view this as a special place. I view this opportunity to be my defensive coordinator as a pretty big honor. It's one of the best jobs in college football. The last three guys that held this job are now the head coach at Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, and Duke. Okay, it's been a pretty good deal. And the guy that had it, two guys before that, was able to use that to springboard into a head coaching job as well, and Bob Diaco. It's a pretty good job.
Yeah, track record.
If you're not willing to wait on this job, that's fine. Go to Oklahoma State. That's just a team that had an opening. I'm not saying Derek Mason did that. Derek Mason wasn't offered a job. That was not a fit. That wasn't going. I'm just making the point of like opening. Go to Miami. Stay at Houston. Stay at Minnesota. Go somewhere else. If you don't think this job is as important and as huge as I think it is, then you've kind of let me know that this isn't that you're not the right guy for the job, right? I want someone who wants to be here, who understands the opportunity that's in front of them. And so I don't think he has to rush this. I don't. And if a coach isn't willing to wait on it, then you just let me know that I made the right decision.
Choice. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I made the right decision.
Right.
And because at the end of the
ball's
day,
in Marcus Freeman's court.
Yeah. At the end of the day, too, he could just say, fine, none of these DCs want this job. I'm just going to hire a linebackers coach and I'm going to call the defense, which I wouldn't mind happening. So
I know, right?
That's just the reality of it. So I've got no problem. You all know what I'm about to say, right? Let it play out. Okay? Let it play out. And I think the thing we should be excited about is Marcus Freeman is putting off hiring a coach to recruit.
Which is what everybody wanted him for.
Right?
Right?
Well, and what is the exact opposite of what we got from Brian Kelly.
Well,
he's not on the road recruiting, and he's down in Florida doing his national offensive coordinator search from his hotel room in Florida, right, between rounds of golf. Right? This is what we wanted, right? This guy is on the road grinding as a recruiter. Marcus Freeman has been all over the country the last couple of weeks. And there was one day they went to like 8 schools in Florida in one day. It was insane. Well, what is he doing at the hotel? Like, he's not getting back to the hotel like with Mickens or Bowden or Reese, sitting by the hotel, pool, kicking his feet up and throwing back some brewskis. No, he's getting on the phone calling kids.
Right.
And those are the things he's doing. And that's the big thing for me is like there's no rush on this. There's no rush on
Things
this.
have
And
changed from like 10 years ago, for
right. And
example.
as the
Yeah.
NFL sees more movement, there's a lot of NFL jobs
There's
still
a
out there.
ton of jobs
What
open. Yeah.
happens is as new coaches get hired and they don't keep certain coaches or they bring their own
Right.
staff, now all of a sudden there's guys out there that maybe weren't on your radar that now are on your radar. So I think they're okay there. I would encourage them to take a breath. It may end up being Al Golden, but I can assure you that on January 28th, Al Golden is not the pick. Neither's Doug Belk, neither's
No one
Joe
is.
Rossi, neither's Coach Lacuba, neither's Chris Ash,
Right.
neither's anybody else. Right now, Marcus Freeman has not made a decision. I don't even know if he's done formal on-campus interviews with all of them yet. I don't think that they have. So just let it play out. Let it play out.
So important. John A1, what is Jaden Thomas's game? Is it more boundary or X? What are his strengths?
Well, I think one of his strengths, John, is he can do both. I think he's got enough size. He's like 6'1". He's over 200 pounds. He's got good ball skills, so I think he can do some stuff in the boundary. And he was a pretty decent route runner as a junior in high school. Senior, not as much because, again, he was dealing with a really bad – I think it was a bad turf toe, I think is what it was, if I remember correctly. But he had an injury that just really – Vince, it'd be great if when you see me starting to choke, you could just kind of take over the
Well, you were in mid-sentence. I didn't know where you wanted me to go with that.
Yeah. So start talking about Jaden Thomas. But, I think he's a guy that I view as more of like a possession type of guy. And again, when possession receiver to me is not an insult like it is to some people. Like the possession receiver to me is DeAndre Hopkins, right? It's Michael Thomas, right? Like those guys are possession receivers. It's a Michael Floyd was a possession receiver. He's pretty good.
It's okay to have those guys that can move the chains. Like that's
right.
somewhat important.
And guys that can work the middle of the field and guys that can
exactly.
win one-on-ones and guys that, are good route runners. Not everybody has to be Will Fuller or Braden Lindsay type of guys. And so I think Jaden's a solid player. It's really tough for me to go read on how good he can be because he just was injured as a senior.
Yeah.
And it's I never got to see that senior year growth and development because he was dealing with an injury all year. I've heard good things about him. He had a great job, did a great job in the bowl practices and he's going to play in the bowl game. And I was like, yeah, okay, we'll see. That's why I didn't report it because I was like, yeah, I've heard this. And every year we hear about some kid that never played a meaningful down, had a great bowl prep. And he's going to play in the bowl game. I'm like, yeah, it never happens. Rarely ever happens unless the guy gets injured.
Right.
And he didn't play snap, I don't think. But I've heard a lot of good things. He's made an impression. And this spring, he's going to get a ton of opportunities. Now, the concern, however, is Jaden's been banged up a lot. He was injured at different times of the year, was injured as a senior in high school. That's concerning for me.
Sure.
He's got to prove he can stay healthy. If he can be healthy this spring, he's going to have a chance to go out there and work his random rotation.
Skylar Hill, Brian, can you explain the relationship of Al Golden and Marcus Freeman? Did they have a past relationship?
Not that I know of. But number one, you don't only hire people that you knew in the past. Al Golden is it wasn't a knock at all. I'm not criticizing him at all. It's a very fair question. I think that's because a lot of the guys are okay. Well, he worked with this guy here, coached against this guy, or whatever the case may be. It was not meant to be a shot at Skylar at all. It's just that you don't only hire guys that you know. What can happen is one of two things can happen is number one, someone who knows him that knows he would like to get back into college coaching. So you reach out and you express interest, or he expresses interest in your program. So I got a chance to get to know Al Golden a little bit back in the early to mid 2000s. I was coaching I was in Virginia in 04 and 05, which is his last 2 years as the D coordinator at Virginia. And then I recruited the state of Virginia and Maryland and from 02 to 03 at the different schools I was at. And so I had a chance to bump into him several times, had a chance to sit down and, with him and his staff and talk a little bit of ball at times. So, at coaches conventions, I bumped into him. So he doesn't have a clue who I am, but obviously I knew who he was. But real nice guy, was a guy that was very well respected by high school coaches in the state of Virginia. And I mean, sure, maybe it was other states too, but I was recruiting in State of Virginia, so those are the only coaches I really talked to. But was known as a very, very good recruiter. And what's funny when you listen to all these Miami people losing their minds of, oh, he sucked and knows. I'm like, what did Al Golden do to get the Miami job? Like, he clearly did something to get the Miami job, right? You morons. But we are talking about Miami fans here, so I shouldn't expect like a high level of intelligence from a bunch of Miami Hurricane fans. So I don't know if there's necessarily like this connection, right? Like, you know what I didn't realize? I was actually going to go look this up. Marcus Freeman was with the Bears as a player. What was it, Vince? Do you remember what years it was?
Oh my gosh, no.
So it was 09. Okay, because somebody made this observation the other day, and I wasn't really aware of that. But he was in camp with the Bears in 09. And yeah, no, see, I didn't think that was accurate. Somebody said that. No, yeah, that is accurate. Yeah. Harry Hiestand was the O-line coach for the Bears in 09. And somebody's like, well, that's the connection. I'm like, Marcus Freeman didn't make it out of camp. Like, he got cut, like, I believe, pretty early in that process with the Bears, right? Because he was with 3 different teams in 09. He was with the Bears, the Bills, and the Texans. So it wasn't like, no, they hired Harry Hiestand because of what Harry Hiestand has already done at Notre Dame. So I think sometimes we're always looking for this like deep connection. And when in reality, it's just, I have a need. That guy's expressed interest. He's really good. Let's pursue it.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like Joe Rossi, I don't know of any connection between him and Joe Rossi, who's another finalist. I don't believe that there's any we've worked with him connection with Tim Lakuba, who's the BC defensive coordinator. But what it is they recruit against each other. They are at a lot of the same coaching clinics, a lot of the same conventions, and they build relationships that way. So it's not an official formal relationship. It's more of the other piece. And I think those are the things that kind of can lead into those kind of things. I want to get down to here some more of these team questions here. We'll go ahead and bring Vince. I'm not kicking you out. We're going to keep you with us. We're going to bring in Ryan Roberts here for this as well. So we're going to – hey, what's up, Ryan?
How are you guys?
Good. We've got a lot of team questions here. They've had some great questions today, so we've had some long-winded answers between me naturally being long-winded and being great questions. We've been able to get to those. So we're gonna do some more.
You're long-winded?
I know, right? No, Imagine that.
Stop.
Imagine that. It's like I'm long-winded. I'm not long-winded, and you don't sound like Mel Kiper Jr. So these people are full of it.
One of those is fact, and the other one is fiction. I'll let you decide on which one.
No, they're both fact. I am long-winded. It's okay. You can say it. It's okay. I know. Oh, there's only one person on this planet that doesn't think Ryan sounds like Mel Kiper Jr., and it's Ryan. And it's a compliment. Compliment.
I asked my wife. She didn't really see it either. She didn't hear the connection there. So. And
your wife sounds like a sports person. So
she is. She is a sports person. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She was watching Bryce Underwood film with him the other day. I thought that was awesome.
Okay.
I'm like, man, you got lucky.
She's big into the 2025 class.
Yeah.
I'm big into the 2025 class too, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. You're teaching them. All right, let's get some questions here. Let's get some questions here before you got to go, Vince.
Connor O'Doherty, coach, what is Botelho's ceiling as a player? If in the right position, could he become an All-American or a high draft pick?
I mean, he's got some tools that could make him turn out to be that, but he's a long way away from that.
Right.
I think part of the problem with him as a player is I don't think he has a natural position. And that could help him in some ways, but as we learned with guys in the NFL, whether it be Owusu Koramoah, Isaiah Simmons, there's still a lot of coaches that are still like real, just kind of set in their ways of you have to fit into this position. And it is what it is. But I mean, part of me, he looks like a linebacker. He's got some pass rushing twitchiness, but he's not super long or super big. So is he a guy that, could be an edge rusher in the NFL? If he is, he's probably more of a 3-4 guy, outside linebacker than he is an end. I mean, I just don't know where he fits yet because he hasn't played a lot of football. So, but his ceiling, look, he's a 240 plus pound kid that's pretty twitchy. And there's always if you can't find a home for a kid like that, assuming he's doing the right things, then you've got to reassess your chosen profession, in my opinion.
He reminds me of, do you remember Zach Bond that came out of Wisconsin a couple years ago?
With the Saints now, right?
Yeah, he's with the Saints, and he kind of had to make a transition when he got to the Saints because, of course, the Wisconsin plays the 3-4 under Leonard, right? So he's playing a lot on ball, playing in space a little bit. Now with the Saints, he's playing like a Sam role, right? Where like they might bring him up on the line of scrimmage at times, but like he's had to play in a stacked position a lot more. So just kind of illustrate, like, it's not a perfect, I think especially into this defense, it's not a perfect fit. I think if it was a 3-4 team, I think it would be a great fit for a guy like Jordan Botelho, but you just got to find ways to maximize, maybe cross-train, in my opinion, in a couple different spots that might take the best out of his games in certain spots, I think.
John A1 says, does Justin Walters have the ability to pass a DJ Brown or a Griffith for a rotation role in 22?
I don't, barring injury, I don't think so.
Right. That was going to be my assessment as well. Yeah. That's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. Notre Dame 2164. How would you guys compare Tobias Merriweather's potential to Notre Dame's past great receivers?
You want to take a first crack at this, Vince?
I mean, he's got the potential to be one of those great receivers. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to project that he's going to be better than those guys, but coming in the door, I feel like as a freshman, he could be better than a lot of those guys. Now, how does he progress? Where does he end up? I think that's a bigger question mark. But I think coming in the door, I really like where his tools are as an incoming freshman.
Ryan, you have a thought on that?
I think he's a lot different than what we've seen in the past because, I mean, my mind goes to guys like Michael Floyd, who obviously Michael Floyd was a bigger body guy.
Right.
Length was similar, but like just a stockier frame. Will Fuller, of course, was just a straight-out blazer. And then you had guys like Chase Claypool, again, huge frame. Miles Boykin, bigger frame. Like this, I think that Merriweather's a little bit – I think he can align at multiple spots. Like, I don't think you have to say he's just an X or he's just a Z. I think that he can both work on and off the line of scrimmage. And he kind of can move around a little better. So I just think his skill set's a little different than what we've seen.
I think that, too, he fits a lot of what you need in a modern receiver, too, in that I think he can literally play all three of the positions in your base offense. And I think that that's the next evolution for me for Tommy Rees to make. And again, I think it's hard to make that evolution when you're just a coordinator because you can't teach them on a daily basis. You're not teaching the receivers, right? You've got to have someone that can do the job. If Chancey Stuckey is an upgrade, my hope is that it allows him to teach players to play multiple positions, which is something that very few players in Notre Dame did, and it usually took them time to get to that level. You need to be able to move guys around. I mean, that's what if you go watch Alabama in 2020, one of the things I loved about their offense, and for everybody Notre Dame doesn't have a Devontae Smith. No, they don't. But that's not the point. Okay.
Right.
The fact that they did this with a Devontae Smith makes it even more impressive from a coaching standpoint is you would literally see Devontae Smith line up at 5 different spots in a game. And so you'd see him as the boundary guy, you'd see him as the field outside guy, you'd see him as the number 2, you'd see him as the number 3 in a trips, you'd see him as the number 2 in an empty boundary side. He would literally line up everywhere in one game. I'm not talking about like over the course of a season. I'm talking about in one game. You go look at the SEC title game against Florida last year, and he probably lined up at 4 different spots in the first quarter. Now, how do you defend that? When you don't know where he's going to be, how do you defend that? But here's the thing. Number one, you need a guy that can actually execute all those positions. And Devontae could. He could do all those different things. Now, is he a guy you're going to put in the boundary for 50 snaps a game? No. But in certain looks, can you and what they would be smart with it is they would do it against teams playing off coverage, or they would do it against teams that played man, and then if it was off coverage, they would run them on some vertical routes. If it was more press, they'd use them to win at the line and either win vertically or they'd get them on chase routes, right? Well, if you can't press me, as soon as I beat you, you can't catch me on crossers and drags, and they ran a lot of that cross field stuff at Bama. So they used him appropriately, but he could do all those things. And I think Tobias is a guy that can – he's not Devontae Smith. I'm making the point that he can play all over the field and do different things, and you have to be able to utilize that, in my opinion. Now, are you going to utilize that all as a freshman? Probably not. You want to get him comfortable in one spot. Exactly. But I think by the end of his freshman year, if you can't get him comfortable enough to play X and W, then got to question that a little bit. You need to be able to do both of those things. And that's what I hope that Tobias can do. I hope he earns it, number one. And then if he does earn it, I hope that they give him a chance to.
And that's the thing for me. Like he's a highly touted freshman. Obviously, we all think he's really good, but nothing's promised. You got to come in, you got to win the job. But if you win the job, if you are better than the guys around you, then so be it. Put him on the field. I mean, again, coach has got to put the best players on the field. If he's one of the best players, he needs to be on the field.
Right.
Period.
Right. All right. Mike Reddy, what are the differences in the three linebacker positions? Mike, Vince, you got your notepad, Vince, by chance?
I do, yeah.
Can you write down Football 101, breaking down the three linebacker positions? I think we've been asked this question a few times.
I think it's time.
I mean, this is a whole show.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
so definitely, Sean, Mike, I wanted to pull this up. We're not going to address this right now because we have a million questions, and that's a very long answer, and it requires a long-winded answer. And when you give me a long-winded answer opportunity, this show may just be about me explaining the three differences. So I love the question. We will address that. I promise you on a future question. So John A1, here's
with so many tight ends on the roster, who's the odd man out? Can any of the young tight ends push Takis, or will we see 12 personnel be more dynamic?
Number one, I mean, we're probably not going to be Raridan's out because he's got a knee injury, and he got hurt in December, so he's probably going to be out for the beginning of the season. He'll come back at some point in time. Him and States were redshirt guys anyway. Kane Barong's an interesting one. I think he's someone that could push those guys. I think the guy that's going to have a tough time getting on the field if everybody projects is Kevin Bauman. And I like Kevin. I just think he's just not dynamic enough to push the veterans. And I think the younger guys, especially like a Kane Barong, brings a really unique aspect to the position group that nobody else really has. He can line up in the slot. He can do a lot of the Tommy Tremble things, or at least how they should have used Tommy. You can put him in the slot and go 4 wide with him and another tight end, and you're kind of in a, you've got like almost like a bigger receiver. You're not going to use him all the time for that, but you can do some things with him. So he's a guy that if he's healthy, and again, he also hurt his knee late in the year, is a guy that I would say that's someone who I look at as a potential mover up the depth chart. This I don't know if he's going to be ready for the spring, but he certainly will be ready for fall camp.
John with another question. If Cam Hart is moved back into the boundary, which of the young corners have the most to offer in the field position?
I mean, me personally, I'm sitting here trying to hope that either Ryan Barnes or Benjamin Morrison just are everything that I think they can be. I mean, it's
Ryan Barnes for me. I
two ceilings are just the highest of my opinion.
I mean, he's just a physical specimen when I see him on the field. When I saw him at practice, he's just so long and athletic, and it's just like, how's this guy not on the field? I mean, honestly, that was my thought process every time I saw him on the field at practice, and hopefully he'll get that opportunity moving forward. Brian, I got to hit the road. That was my bell, so I will see you guys later.
See Vince. Brian, I think you're on mute.
I didn't even hit the mute button that time. I think Philip Riley's another guy that I'm looking for as potentially making a move this spring.
Well, I think we talked about that last week, right? And I think I was on the Barnes, and I think I mentioned Riley as well. So I know you like Morrison though. So hopefully there's just good competition in general. And
that's what you want.
So good.
Yeah. And Jaden Mickey. I mean, I probably shouldn't dismiss Jaden Mickey because he's going to be an early enrollee, and he's probably one of the more advanced corners they've signed from a technique and a competition standpoint as well.
Well, and it's cool, like thinking that, especially if it's Barnes or a Morrison that pops in, right, and they're kind of taking control. That's a lot more length than I can remember Notre Dame having at the cornerback positions.
Oh, yeah.
Combined with a Cam Hart, it was obviously like 6'2", 6'2.5". So.
Oh, yeah. I got a text message question that somebody wants to ask you. It's a non-recruiting question, a friend of ours, someone that you and I both know.
Okay.
And he says, last year, obviously, Justin Adamiola went from sort of a guy that didn't play a ton the year before, and Justin kind of predicted that people were gonna feel him a little bit this year, and he ended up being second on the team in sacks this year. And Justin is now publicly saying that he would like to double his production next year. If he does that or close to that, what do you see from Justin Adamiola as a potential NFL draft getting on NFL draft boards? Where do you see him potentially falling on NFL draft boards a year from now?
All right, so he had what did he have? 4.5?
Five.
He had 5. Oh, well, if he has 10 sacks, that's eye popping.
Yeah.
And
that's in a rotation role too.
Right. Well, the problem is still that defensive end is or just outside rusher. We'll throw 3-4 outside stand-up rushers into there too. Those are positions that NFL teams really value traits a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a guy that we talked about before. Like, he has nuance to his game from a hand perspective, from a move arsenal perspective, but I don't think from a length athleticism perspective he's going to necessarily pop off the screen for a lot of evaluators. So I still think that especially if he gets 10 sacks, that type of production, he's going to be a draftable player. I would like to, obviously, without watching what the film at 100% looks like, just off of speculation, I'm going to say that it's still somewhere early to mid day 3, just because the traits aren't going to be great. I think that a guy like Quincy Roche, who was at Temple and ended up at Miami, had similar things, right? Like, he was very productive at Temple, not quite as productive as Miami, went to the Senior Bowl, dominated the Senior Bowl. But the fact of it is still that he's 6'2.5" and a 4'7" athlete. Like, he's not anything dynamic. So I still think that there's some parts of Justin that's going to be a little questioned by NFL evaluators. But I think if he has that type of production, he's definitely a draftable player without question.
And I think Justin too is a lot for him is going to depend on the pro day and the combine. You know, like you said, the film is going to get you so far. The combine's going to, and the pro days will only get you so far. What you really need are both of those things.
Especially at that position. That position is so driven off of traits, because you see guys every year that fool people, like Derek Barnett, who went 14th overall, who's not been a great football player. Curtis Weaver, that came out of Boise State a couple years ago, ultra productive, but just didn't have the traits to take that production and translate it to the NFL. Like, it's just such a traits-driven position.
And then sometimes we see guys with the traits that turn out not to be good players because they're not good football players, and that's the risk you run. Most this is as an outsider. You're closer to it than I am, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But if it comes down to it, if you're going to take college production and lack of traits and traits, but a lack of production, a lot of GMs were going to go with the guy with the traits.
Oh, 100%.
And it's just the expression of, I can teach this kid how to play football, right? I can't teach you to, like, for Justin, I can't teach Justin to be 6'5" with 35-inch arms because he's not those things. But I think if he can, he's got to do two things to overcome the lack of size. One, production. Production's got to be there. Absolutely. I think even more, and I would like to even see from him more production in the pass game, not just as a pass rusher. If he's going to be a 3-4 outside linebacker, he's got to show the ability to kind of drop into coverage and do some of those things, which he did a couple times last year. Number two, he's going to have to test better than maybe people project him to test. Your point about Quincy Roche was correct. You can't be 6'2", 245 with, 33-inch arms and run a 4.7 plus. You're just going to be a day 3 guy. You go out there and surprise some people with a 4.5. Now, so we say, well, okay, hold on a second now. Let's take a second look at this kid. Let's go back and look at the film again because of what this kid put up numbers-wise. And I think Justin's going to have something like that, in my opinion. Like Kevin Austin's the same way. If Kevin Austin wants to get drafted higher than 5 to 7, he's going to need to do something at the combine that makes people take a second look at the film. Right. Because the production's not there. There's some bad film that people are going to see. But if the traits are there, 6'2.5", 215, oh, wow, he ran a 4.4. Oh, he had a 39, 40-inch vertical. Right. Let's go back and take a look at this kid again. That's just the way it works.
Yep. That's how it happens every single year. You'll see, Jason Owe and the kid from Washington at defensive end both went in the first round this year. It wasn't based upon production. Jason Owe had 0 sacks. But he ended up playing pretty well, though, this year for Baltimore because, again, those traits do translate with NFL coaching usually. Not always, of course.
Right. And that's why they'll always take the chance on a guy like that, right? And, now we'll see if he can take it to the next level. But, that's a guy that I know Notre Dame really tried to get too. Jason Owe was a guy that Notre Dame recruited pretty hard, but decided to go to Penn State. So what did he do this year? He had, 5 sacks this year?
I think he had
Decent.
a lot of
Yeah.
pressures.
A lot
though.
of pressures, yeah.
I think he was the rookie leader in pressures.
3
if I'm
forced
not-
fumbles also.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good number.
Yep.
And he was a rotation guy too. He wasn't like the full-time
No.
every down.
He actually had a better year the year prior. I think he had like 5.5 sacks his sophomore year at Penn State, playing with what was the kid?
Was he with Gross Matos?
Yeah, Yator Gross Matos, and they had the other kid too, Shakatoni, right? And then he was the rotational guy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in 2019, Oweh had 5 sacks. And Micah Parsons was also on that team.
Yes, it was. Yes,
that was. How did that team? Good Lord! Are you kidding me? They couldn't beat Ohio State that year. Are you kidding me? Lost Ohio State by 11.
Sean Clifford's your answer, my friends.
Hey, look, man. Look, buddy. You had Yator Gross Matos, Micah Parsons, Shakatoni, Jason Oweh,
Jaquan Brisker. Yeah,
good Lord. You shouldn't have given up 28 points. Sean Clifford isn't the reason you gave up 28 points to Ohio State. Good Lord.
Was Miles Sanders on that team too, or was he already off that team? Yeah. That was a good team.
No. That was the year after he left. Journey Brown was their tailback that year.
Gotcha.
Who averaged 6.9 yards per carry and had 12 touchdowns.
Journey was a really good player, man. Unfortunately, he had that career ender.
Was it a heart issue?
It was degenerative heart issue or something. Yeah, it was in a large heart actually. I mean, yeah. Very unfortunate.
Yep. Connor O'Doherty, Brian and Vince, and Sean and Ryan, I love you guys.
Appreciate it, guys.
That's not a question, but sometimes the comments are just so good that we just have to get them up on there. So I appreciate that very, 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 very much. Let's see down there. We got a couple non-recruiting questions down here that I want to get to.
Sure.
John Papita with the super chat. Thank you, John. Hey, guys, thanks for the show on this snowy day. When do you think Freeman will pick a DC? And will this person actually be calling a D, or will it actually just be Freeman making a call? So I want to address this. The first part we kind of already answered, Joe. I think once the dead period starts, you're going to see Coach Freeman shift to hiring mode. I think you're going to see him interviewing some running back candidates next week. I think you're going to see him start to, go a little bit deeper into the DC thing. Part of the reason it's taking so long is because ideally, and this second part of your question, Joe, is really good. Ideally, Coach Freeman wants to give over play calling duties. He doesn't want to call plays. He wants to be the head coach, right? So that's if he just wanted to hire somebody that was like going to be a linebackers coach and sort of a de facto coordinator and he'd call the plays, I guarantee you that decision would have already been made. Because he's doing his due diligence, it's a partly an effect of the fact that he does want to hire someone that he trusts to run the defense. He would like that. And when it's, as I'll say it again, when it's your baby and defense is his baby, you're going to really be more thorough than maybe you should at your receivers coach, who you're just kind of trusting your OC to make the choice, right? And then you meet the guy and you sign off on it, right? This is a deal where when it comes to even more so than D-line or corners, this is your position. This is what you coached. And this is your D coordinator spot. So I'm talking linebackers and D coordinator. You're going to be a little bit more picky. That's just the nature of it. And so I think that's part of it too. But ultimately, he would like to have someone calling plays. If Marcus Freeman's calling the defense next year, it's one of two reasons. One, they couldn't work out a deal with the coordinator that he liked. He's not going to hire DC just to hire DC. He's going to hire someone that he really likes. He couldn't, maybe the money isn't right or whatever the case may be, or it's because he hires somebody they're not doing the job. And I think then he would probably step in. But I think he wants to make it very clear to whoever he hires, if I hire you, I'm not going to be stepping in the first time you make a call I don't like or the first time we have a bad game. I want you to know that this is your thing, and that's why I'm hiring you. That can be a concern too, is if I'm taking a D coordinator job for a guy that was just the D coordinator, that's something that you want to make sure of too as a coach, is like, look, I want to make sure that if you're hiring me to run the defense, that you're going to let me run the defense, right? That you're not going to be stepping in every day and undermining me and that kind of stuff. I think that's a very fair question on the opposite end too of this conversation. So I just wanted to make sure that I got to that question, but that was a very good question. Here's one from Jeffrey Richardson. Jeffrey, thank you for the super chat. Jeffrey says, how would you compare Buckner and Wimbush as runners? And how would they compare in a Tom Rees run offense? 2, how do they compare as a passer? Ryan, you want to take first crack at that first answer, the first part of that answer?
Yeah, I think they are similar runners, right? Like they're pretty well compact runners from just a body type perspective. I think they're definitely more like one cut linear dudes than I would say like super, agile and make guys miss. I think they can make.
They're
guys
not
miss as
Lamar
well,
in that
right?
regard.
Like they're not guys that are just going to shake a ton, but they're going to hit a corner and they're going to explode because they have big time.
And they can make a
players.
cut. They can make a cut, right? Like we saw that with Tyler this year. Yeah.
Right. If we wanted to compare them, they're like outside zone runners, right? Like they can stick their foot in the ground and get vertical. Absolutely. They can make a guy miss. But I mean, like, shake it to the sideline, deadly jump cuts. Like I don't see those types of runners, but they're compact. They're physical runners. They can get downhill. They can run. It's not just zone read. Like they can run quarterback power. Like they can get involved in different aspects of the game. So I think stylistically, actually speaking, I think they're pretty similar at runners, in my opinion. Yeah.
I would say that Tyler's a little bit more smooth.
Okay.
Brandon was more powerful. Now, keep in mind, that was Brandon as a senior and Tyler as a freshman.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would say that, but to his point, stylistically, they're very similar.
Mm-hmm.
As passers, it's not even close. Because again, we're going off of what Tyler Buckner is in college and what Brandon Wimbush became in college, which was just a shell of what he was at St. Peter's Prep. But Brandon had a much more powerful arm than Tyler. Brandon had a bazooka. The problem is Brandon had a bazooka with no tracking device, right? There was no guidance system as part of that weaponry he had. His ball placement was questionable at best. He struggled with touch, which he really didn't always do great with. When he had to throw with touch, his idea of touch was slowing my delivery down and trying to aim it out there. And that doesn't work. Brandon had a very long throwing motion, I felt, which made it difficult for him to be effective in the quick game, the RPO game. I mean, there are times he just take an RPO throw and throw it into the ground because he just couldn't do that quick, catch and throw type of thing. Now, when Brandon could drop back and throw a 25-yard in cut, it looked good. Yeah. Because that was all power. But Tyler is much cleaner release, much quicker release, much better ball placement, 15 and under. I think he's got better downfield touch. What he lacks is Brandon's power as a passer. I think he's also already more advanced than Brandon was. And when it comes to anticipation and going through his progressions and those type of things, he'll be better as a sophomore than Brandon was as a senior in that regards. And that's the kind of thing I get encouraged by is when I think of Tyler Buckner, I think of Brandon Wimbush with much better passing potential. That's a scary thought if you really think about it. Because to your point, Ryan, I think you're saying what I'm saying, which is Tyler Buckner could do everything that Brandon Wimbush did as a runner, in my opinion, in 2017. I don't think Brandon Wimbush could do things that Tyler Buckner can do as a passer.
I don't disagree.
That's the difference.
Yep.
And that's what we've always said. Like, what would Notre Dame have been like if Brandon Wimbush was a better passer in 2017?
Right.
Well, that's Tyler Buckner.
Well,
we're going to find out.
I think, like, stylistically speaking, as passers, like, I get much more like point guard vibes, shortstop vibes from a guy like Buckner, while Wimbush always kind of gave me like javelin thrower vibes, you know, like long release, but like he came out and it had some torque to it.
You know what, Ryan? He was a 1980s quarterback.
Fair.
Right? Like he was more Tony Rice than he was, Lamar Jackson, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing is, because again, you could be Tony Rice was a Heisman runner-up in a year where he threw 2 touchdowns and 9 picks. Right? Like that's Brand. You could complete 50% of your passes and be a big-time player back then.
When you're running the triple option.
Right. Or a power option. I mean, all those type of power offenses, because most of your throws are just dropping back and launching that sucker down the field, right? I mean, Tony Rice threw way fewer passes than Jack Connery and Book did, but I'd be willing to bet you he threw a lot more balls beyond 20 yards than those quarterback did back in the, when you look at his offense, because it's just a different offense.
Right.
Brandon became a guy that was kind of trapped in the wrong era, I think. Like I remember they had a really good show on the ACC network recently, right? I don't know if you saw, but it was about the 1990 Georgia Tech football team.
Mm-mm.
And, Brandon would have fit great on that team. It's just the kind of player he was. But
well, he would have fit well in those Paul Johnson Georgia Tech teams.
Oh, yeah.
Years
Yeah.
too.
And that's what I tried to kind of tell him. Like, look, you need to find a place that's going to let you be a runner when you're a grad transfer. And he went a different way on that, and it didn't really work out for him. But I think Tyler Buckner's a much better fit in this offense than Brandon would have been. What Brandon became, again, Brandon was a different kid in high school. If Brandon wouldn't have been ruined by Mike Sanford, I still think he could have been a much better player.
Brandon Wimbush may have been my most optimistic recruit I can remember, just because he's a New Jersey guy. I saw him play in high school because he's like an hour up north from where I am at St. Peter's. And man, he was so good. Like, it was just absurd, some of the throws that he made, and obviously the rushing ability too. But I agree. Passing wise, I never would have thought that he would struggle as much as he did during the course of his career. Like he seemed like I'm not going to say like a advanced passer, but like I didn't see any accuracy issues when he was at St. Peter's. Like, he was a natural thrower, it seems.
Right.
But yeah.
Yes, he always had a long release.
Right.
But he was a natural passer. He looked nothing about what he did in 2017 and 2018 looked natural.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I go back to the fact that his formational years as a college player was under a quarterback's coach who had no business being at a place like Notre Dame. Yeah. None. Which is why he's been fired like 6 times since he left Notre Dame. And still keeps getting rehired for some insane reason. I don't understand, but I guess if Brian Van Gorder can get rehired multiple times, then so can Mike Sanford.
Is he still at Bowling Green?
No, he's at some high school in Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, he got fired from Bowling Green, but kept getting hired. Toe Jam 1992 said, Brian, did the stats you looked at, the stats, Ryan, this is before you joined the show, we looked at the explosive runs under Harry Eastand's last 4 years compared to Jeff Quinn's 4 years.
You posted that on the message board, right?
Yeah. So did you see those numbers? So like the 25 of 50 plus compared to 12. Mm-hmm. Toe Jam says, Brian, did the stats you looked at for the running back production indicate if the initial contact was behind the line of scrimmage? And then continued, it says, I'm asking because, thank you for the super chats, by the way, Toe Jam. I'm asking because it seemed like Kyron was getting hit in the backfield a lot, while Adams used to not have to make contact until the second level. I didn't include that in my research, but that is something I've observed. And yes, there was a lot more of sort of the line yards were less. And what they consider line yards is, what is it, like 2 yards behind past line of scrimmage, Ryan, is something like that, where the line gets credit for the first 2 yards. And, but those are flawed too, because if you're like Kyron's 91-yard touchdown run, Kyron got all the credit for that play. None of it goes to the offensive line. He got hit 3 times in the line of scrimmage, and I
posted that picture when it happened, just like the screenshot of him like shaking off the first guy when there's like 6 dudes around him and he still breaks it somehow. It's absurd. Yeah. It's absurd.
Yeah. And that's not a line play. That's not a, hey, great job, guys. You helped spring a 90-something yard touchdown. It's like, hey, that 90-yard touchdown run was in spite of you. Right. And then you compare that to like, the 91-yard run that CJ Prosise had against Georgia Tech back in 2015, where he literally was never touched. The 80-yard touchdown, 84-yard touchdown Josh Adams had against USC, where he was never touched. He had a 70-yard touchdown run against North Carolina, where he was never touched. So it's a little bit of a different animal with those lines than it was this past season.
I was at the Temple game during Kaiser's redshirt freshman season when he had like that 84-yarder or whatever it was. It was never touched. It was insane.
And it was just a read zone. It was just inside zone. They collapsed on CJ, and there you go. Yep. And we're going to see some of that stuff with Tyler Buckner. There's no doubt about it. And that's kind of why I'm excited. I guess that's partly why I'm more excited than maybe some other people are. I don't think he has to be Jimmy Clausen to be a dynamic quarterback, but I think he's going to eventually develop into a really good throwing quarterback. I think that's what people are missing about Tyler. He's got a lot of potential as a passer. The kid threw for 4,500 yards as a junior in high school. Threw for over 50 touchdowns on top of rushing for over 1,600 yards and 28 touchdowns. It's just absurd. And I don't care what level of football you're playing at. When you combine for over 80 touchdowns, you're special. I don't care where you're playing. Let's just say this. There weren't any kids on my D3 radar that accounted for 81 touchdowns in a season, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're pretty special if you're doing that. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to some more of these team questions here before we move on to Craig Doherty. Happy Friday, IB Nation. Same to you, Craig and John. Here's one from Hulk Strongest. I love this name. That's why I always try to bring up his questions, his or her questions. Hey, She-Hulk's coming out soon, so maybe it's a lady. I don't know. If the O-line improves like we expect it to, do you think teams will be terrified by retaking it to the house on any given play? Yeah.
I'd be terrified even with a bad offensive line that he can take it any play, to be honest. Like, he's that speed. I mean, he's a legit 4.3 kid. Like, it's he literally any time he gets a crease could take it. But yes, to answer your question, absolutely. If he's behind a better offensive line, the fear is going to be substantially higher. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially if they tailor the run concepts when he's in the game to what he does best, which they did not do in 2021. Yes, you absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. There will be, and that's the thing about it is, like, that's kind of what made that 2017 team so unique. People say, well, how could you run the ball like that when there was no pass game threat? Like, that's what a running quarterback does, because you can't key on the running back every time. It's like, okay, who's going to beat us? Is it going to be Adams? Is it going to be Tyree? And I want to put some perspective on this. Josh Adams ran a 4.48 at the Notre Dame Pro Day. That was coming off of a foot injury. Yeah. Ryan, what would you project his 40 time to have been? I mean, he may be like a low 4.4, would you say?
I would say somewhere between like 4.43 to 4.45, somewhere
right, if healthy, right?
Yeah.
At best, he's a 4.4 flat. As a 4.4 flat, he's still a full 1/10 of a second slower than Chris Tyree.
Yeah.
Because Chris Tyree has run high 4.2s and low 4.3s during his career in high school. I doubt he's gotten slower since he got to Notre Dame. So yeah, that is absolutely going to be a concern.
Yeah,
there's no question about it. AJ asked, "Did you expect that a new running backs coach would have been named by now?" No. Again, I think we all have to understand with them not really caring about signing day. This February signing day, because they've already signed everybody. I think it's about getting the right guy as opposed to the expedient hire. For example, there were some names on the board early. They liked them. I don't think they were necessarily in love with them, so they just kept looking. And there's now a couple new names on the board that weren't originally on the board that are better candidates. Had they hurried in to make it happen, then they would have probably hired someone that's not as good as some of the guys on the board now. And now, of course, they've got to convince those guys to hire. I believe that they're going to be, probably starting interviews next week. But there's just not this rush that I think people think that there needs to be. And I get why you all feel that way. I think I know where it's coming from, because for much of our lives as football fans, you better have that staff in place by that first Wednesday of February, because that's when signing day is. With the way that the early signing period has turned into, it's just not the same. It's not the same anymore. And, when we're still well over a month away from spring ball. Yeah. So I imagine something will happen in the next week or two. Next week, I'd say probably, is we'll start to hear some things about who they like. Because my understanding is, I do believe they're going to start with interviews next week. And usually when you start interviews, you know who you want, and you're going to make a decision pretty quickly after that. And you've kind of narrowed things down to that point, and you're going to start figuring it out after that. So that's kind of where that is. Okay, here's a question. I love things like this. From Anthony Stauffer. Eliminate one. Golden Tate, Raymond McKnight, Michael Floyd, Chase Claypool. That's an easy one for me.
Is it? Is it easy?
Yeah, it is. It's Rama. And I loved Rama, but he was never the player that Golden Tate, Michael Floyd, or Chase Claypool were.
I'm not disagreeing. I for whatever reason, I was just thinking schematically in my head how each three would fit together, and that kind of clouded it for me. It was between Rima and Chase Claypool for me. I was kind of debating in my mind which one would fit better with Floyd and Tate, which would be the obvious two for me. So
I think for me, it's like, okay, fit better. Give me Golden Michael and Chase Claypool, I'm going to make it work. And then you put Golden Tate in a slot with his ability to run the football, jet sweeps and things like that. Like, That could be a lot of fun. But yeah, if I had to eliminate one, it'd be Rama. I still would have liked to have seen how Rama would have panned out had he not hurt his knee the year in 2005.
Yeah, with Samardzija and Stovall.
Yeah. And also for him, I mean, he was a little stiffer, a little tighter in 2006. I mean, remember, he was the guy you were throwing tunnel screens to and look screens to in 03 and 04 before the injury in 05. So he wasn't the same athlete he was when he came back. Now, again, what do you have, like 15 touchdowns in 06? Rama was no bum at all. Rama was really good. It's just those other guys are also really good. I mean, I'm like, and here's the thing that's crazy about, you think about Notre Dame the last 15 years. I'm sitting there asking myself, where's Will Fuller, right? Where's Mo Stovall on this conversation, right? Like, yeah, Samardzija, like, there's some dudes that they've had some dudes now, and they need to get back to that. In my
that's my biggest what if, Brian, honestly, as a Notre Dame fan, is I would have just loved to see what Jeff Samardzija would have looked like as an NFL player. I would have loved to see it. You know? But
I think his speed ultimately would have kept him from really being. I never thought he was really fast.
No,
and he wasn't like this precision route runner like a Cooper Kupp where he could have overcome it. But financially, he made the right decision.
Oh, for sure.
There's no doubt about it.
For sure about that. Yeah.
AJ with a follow-up. Actually, let me rephrase my question. Is that running back coaching search taking longer than you expected, or am I just impatient and thirsty for news? I believe it is the latter, AJ. and I appreciate. So he put this comment out way before we answered his original question about the running back search. I didn't see it. That is really good stuff. I appreciate that very, very much. Gabe Weiss, if you could bring any former player back to fill an open position on the coaching staff, who would it be? Good to see you guys. Haven't been able to catch a show in forever. Any former player
on the coaching staff
to fill out a open position on the coaching staff, who would it be? Good to all right. You know what? I'm gonna kind of just steal a little bit and cheat a little bit. The guy that I would bring back, because there's an opening at that position, right? He's already on campus.
Bettis, huh? Quarterback coach. Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, look, I've said it's the easiest position to coach. He's a Hall of freaking Fame running back. I'm pretty sure he knows the position, right?
Yeah.
And I think he'd probably have some success in the recruiting trail. Call me crazy, but yeah, if I could, hey Jerome, while you're working on your masters, why don't you go ahead and help us coach running backs? That would probably be the guy that I would, because I'm just running back to me is a recruiting position, and I got a feeling that Jerome Bettis could be a pretty darn good recruiter.
And
there's no doubt about it.
It's a tough one for me because my mind went to defensive coordinator because, that's obviously the most important position.
You thinking Anthony Weaver?
Man, I honestly don't. I went through my mind. I was like Trevor Laws, Derek Landry. I used to love Derek Landry. I'm gonna go linebacker coach. Let's bring Monty back. Monty Teo. Why not?
Okay.
Let's bring him back. He's got obviously the fanfare. What he finished second in the Heisman. So
yeah, I'd love to see those Manti talking to recruits and parents about his situation. That would be fun.
I mean, nowadays, getting catfish is just part of the world.
Yeah, there's shows about it now. Apparently, I see commercials for it when I'm watching Law and Order. You know who I would love to see get into coaching when his career's over, and I would absolutely bring him back if at Notre Dame. Harrison Smith.
Oh, good one. Yeah,
I think Harrison Smith would be a guy that could get in coaching. Golden Tate's a guy that I've heard has expressed interest about possibly getting into coaching.
I can see
that. We're talking about receiver.
Yeah,
he would be a guy that I would look at, potentially. Like people say, bring Brady. I don't think Brady Quinn would be a great coach. I just, he'd be a great motivational speaker, maybe. But I think some guys just kind of have that mind for coaching, and I think that Harrison Smith just strikes me as a guy that would be a really, really good football coach. Aaron Taylor's a guy that I've always thought if he decided to get into coaching, I think he'd be a really good coach.
For sure, yeah,
because he's really knowledgeable of O-line play, and he's a guy that I would consider.
Yeah, my mind always goes to underachievers, getting into coaching.
Yeah,
guys
which I get.
Most have their ability,
what former players? You mean you start thinking of catchers? If you're talking about Major League Baseball, right? What former guys would you? Oh, let me think of who they've had at catcher the last 20 years. Okay, that's how it goes. Yep. Here's a good one, Ryan from AJ. What are your top 5 college football helmets?
Oh man, I don't. I have to
I mean,
think a lot.
Notre Dame is definitely on there. Here's the thing you have to understand: there's some teams I despise that I love their helmets, or at least
Okay.
Look, I hate Michigan with a passion, but there's some tradition to that helmet that you can't ignore. I mean,
Agree
as
there.
much as I hate it, I'll tell you the most overrated helmet of all time. And every time I see a conversation about greatest helmets, everybody always wants to bring up Penn State.
Okay.
I think that's absolute. It's a white helmet with a freaking blue stripe. Like that's the lamest.
It's his history, man. It's
Yeah,
history.
it's bad history. Sometimes history needs to be changed.
That's
You know what I mean?
that's
Like
fair.
even Notre Dame's gold helmet now doesn't look like it did before. Somebody's a little fired up from her doctor visit today.
Sorry, yeah, she just walked into the room.
That's what happens with 1-year-olds, man. So,
yep.
but
I'm looking it up literally right now to try to jog my memory because, of course, Notre Dame is going to be in that top
right,
five for
but
me.
they've
No
changed theirs
bias,
recently.
but
That their
yeah.
helmet's new. They've evolved with a more modern look for their gold helmet, which I think is even better.
You know
than
who I
their old
like?
school gold helmet. Okay,
I like the Iowa Hawkeye. I like
okay,
that. I like that helmet, the black
okay.
with the like the yellow Hawkeye. I think
Mhm.
that's kind of sharp. I'm just taking a look at some. No, Ohio State stinks. See,
I
they, like
like.
this list has Penn State at number 7. To your point,
It's a freaking white helmet. It's
yeah.
dull. It's boring. Like Alabama's got a boring. Like it's iconic from a branding standpoint, but it's not a great helmet,
Right.
right? Like I would never, start a new team and say, hey, let's have Alabama's helmet, just a solid color with a number on it. Ooh, real creative. I like LSU's helmets. Now I may not like them
Like
anymore
Miami.
moving forward because but the Tiger and then LSU on it, I think I like that. I've always liked Texas's helmet. I like the all white with the
horns,
long horn on it.
Yeah.
Again, if you're going to have all white, at least have something on it. You know what I mean? I think that's iconic. I don't love it. Here's a helmet that I think is underrated, and I wish they would go to it more. When Oregon just goes with their green helmet with the yellow O on it, I love that combination.
That's fair.
It just the traditional green, Oregon green. Like I hated their helmets back in the day when they were yellow with the with the green O, but when they went under chip, when they would have just the classic green with the yellow O, I think that's a really sharp looking helmet.
Miami Hurricanes, I kind of like. I think they're pretty nice.
Somebody mentioned Ole Miss. I like Ole Miss's helmets.
Okay.
AJ's were Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia, and Ole Miss. I like Ole Miss's helmets. I think Georgia has a really sharp helmet because Georgia's they're not red.
No.
It's red, but it's a different kind of red. Like I kind of like their helmet. I dislike Georgia, but I do like their helmet. Florida,
North Carolina. North Carolina's the one. Their uniforms just
UCLA is another
sharp.
one.
Yeah.
UCLA is another one. I like UCLA's helmets because it's gold, but it's got something going on there. I like UCLA's helmets as well. I think that's a good one. Trying to think some other ones. I've never been a big fan of USC's helmets, and it's not about the rivalry thing. It's just kind of like it's like the maroon with the yellow. It's like it's hard to see.
Yeah.
That, and then they got the gray face mask is just kind of.
I like the little bit older Michigan State ones when like Drew Stanton, Javon Ringer,
with
like
the
all
S?
those dudes were. Yeah, I thought that was nice. I thought it was sharp. It was solid.
Yeah, there's some good helmets. I've never been a big fan of Oklahoma's.
No,
I'm just trying to think through some of the different teams. I've always liked Texas Tech's helmets. I like the black with the TTU on it. I've always liked their helmets. I think that's a good one, especially when they go with the red jersey. The black, the red, and the black. That's one of my favorite color combinations because I don't like all black uniforms. I think they're just kind of look like it's a black uniform. Like it's just like, when you guys trying to like sneak out somewhere and like not be seen. The red, the black, and the red, or the black, the red, and the black is a combination I've always really liked.
I don't have it in front of me, but I was thinking Kansas State is something that appeals to me a little bit.
Like the silver and the Wildcat, and then they got a stripe. Yeah. Kansas. I like Kansas's helmets.
Oh, someone just put Memphis, the Memphis Chromes, the University of Memphis. They're sweet. Yeah, good call there.
Because they've got because it's not just the newer look. Yeah, that's a good look.
Oh, Memphis uniforms are just in general are nice, man. The new blue ones, they're nice. The gray.
I don't like when they put the Cincinnati Bengals stripes on their helmets though.
No.
I don't like that alternate. I don't like that a whole lot. Yeah, those are some of the unis I like. I'm trying to think if there's any more, but there's going to be some that just randomly pop in our heads as we're going through the show, and we'll probably just blurt them out. That is kind of we get into it. So, okay, let me get down here some more team questions before we jump into some recruiting, and we'll get to that. Jay Montalbano has a comment here. He says, Brian, I'm excited about TB12. That'd be Tyler Buckner. I think he can be an absolute beast at quarterback for the Irish. My concern is that he will be properly developed by Tommy Rees' thoughts. Look, I understand the concern about Tommy Rees' development because so far he hasn't developed a big-time player. But I do think the fact that he was able to have Ian Book be a starting quarterback for as long as he was and you win as many games, I think he has to get some credit for that. I think we saw Jack Cohn really ascend throughout the entire year last year to where he was playing his best football down the stretch. I think Tommy Rees deserves some credit for that. Can he develop a player like Tyler Buckner? That's the big question for me because he's had one great talent before Tyler Buckner, and he flipping blew it, and that was with Phil Jakovic because he was unwilling to adapt to that style. Now, Tyler has more of a natural passing feel that I think Rees likes than Phil, who was more of just a street ball kind of guy early on. And I think he recruited Tyler and he didn't recruit Phil. And I think that we can't overlook that either because Phil committed before Tyler Buckner. He signed when Tommy Rees was the quarterback's coach, but he committed well before Tommy Rees did. So I understand the questions and the concerns about Tommy Rees. And I'm not going to defend Tommy Rees as a quarterback developer. I would just say I think he's done enough with Ian Book because I don't think Ian Book's issues with confidence and anticipation and throwing down the field, I don't think those are a Tommy Rees problem. I think those are an Ian Book, Brian Kelly problem. And I think when we saw from Jack Cohn this year again, when he finally was able to do what he wanted to do on offense, and I say that because what Tommy talked to us about when he was on our show this summer, and from what people that was around him talked about, and the reason we kept talking about 40 points per game, 40 points per game, 40 points per game was because of the things we were being told they were going to do on offense. We didn't see that after the Florida State game. I don't really know why. And we didn't see it again until really the North Carolina game. Well, if you look at Notre Dame's last 6 games, again, they had a couple of defensive touchdowns, but they averaged 40 points per game and over 300 yards passing per game with Jack Cohn, a quarterback. Who I like Jack. I like Jack more than most for this team. But with all due respect, Tyler Buckner's a far more dynamic player than Jack Cohn is right now. And as he gets a year of knowledge in the system, I think he's going to be fine. So I think Tommy did a pretty nice job this year when he was finally allowed to be the coordinator. And we also can't dismiss whatever your feelings are about Tommy Rees. You have to at least be open-minded to this fact. He was coaching last year with 2 hands tied behind his back, meaning he had an offensive line coach that couldn't teach run blocking very well. And he had a receivers coach that couldn't teach guys how to do anything against any group of corners with any kind of physicality or pressability. I mean, he had 2 of the worst position coaches in Power 5 at 2 pretty important positions in your offense. And they still scored 40 points per game in the last 6 games. They still scored 35 on the season. And so I just say I just be open-minded to see how things go this year. If Tyler Buckner can't be developed this year and the offense doesn't take another step this year, then I think we'll be at a place where we can say, hey, you know what, maybe Tommy's just not that guy. I'm just more willing to give him a year without Brian Kelly kind of hovering over him to see what he can do. I don't know what you think about that, Ryan, but that's kind of my 2 cents on that conversation.
I don't have an opinion one way or the other, to be honest with you, about Coach Rees. I'm just at the point where I just want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is, like you said, there is evidence that he did a good job with Jack Cohn down the stretch. There is evidence that he maybe didn't do as well as he should have with a Phil Dracovic and that whole situation.
Or Brandon Wimbush.
So there is evidence going both ways. I want to see it because it's a clean slate. It's his guy, Tyler Buckner, right? Like he recruited him. He's here. He let him sit for a year to get, he got a little bit of his playing time, sporadically. Like I want to see, and I think that there's a lot on the line with Tyler Buckner. Like I don't think that there's many more, like fans are not going to be super patient if Tyler Buckner does not turn out for much longer. Like this is put up or shut up type time for Coach Reese. And obviously from the fan goggles, I hope he
Right.
does an amazing job.
Right.
But I don't really have a opinion one way or the other because
Yeah.
I just want to see what happens with it.
I think my bigger concern right now with Tommy Reese, and we'll get into this here in a few minutes because we have a lot of questions about Dante Moore, is recruiting. I mean, at some point in time, you've got to show me that you can consistently go out there and get these kind of guys. And that's going to be a bit of a question. A real quick question from Adam Birch. Does Buckner's game look like Josh Allen's? He's not as tall, but seems like he kind of has similar traits. I don't think he has similar traits at all. They're both athletic. That's about it. Josh is huge with a monster arm. And Tyler is smaller and doesn't have a big arm. Tyler is more quick throws, accuracy, 25 and in kind of guy. Josh is a vertical and down kind of guy. And there's just things you can do run game wise with Josh Allen. They're going to be different than Tyler Buckner because he's 6'5", 240 pounds. Right. So no, I don't.
Yeah.
I would say that I wouldn't even say they can have a similar impact because they're just such a different type of body and a different type of skill set that I just they're not guys that I would compare. And that's not saying Tyler Buckner can't be a great player. They're just different type of guys.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right. Blake Kajar, is there any indication that Xavier Watts will move back to receiver? All that I can tell you is that he has been given the choice of he can play where he wants to play this year. That's all I know at this point in time. Whatever he's going to choose, I do not know. Airball VW recently joined. Thank you for that. Love IB and IB Nation. Maybe too much. If my mom was still around, she might say that IB is the next thing that might make me go blind. I didn't read far enough ahead for that one, so I'm glad to have you with us.
Too much screen time.
Laughing right now in my current condition makes me have to cough, so we're not allowed to. No more funny jokes. I appreciate that. Ladarius Martin, Irish Nation, what's good and what's up, Vincent Bryan? Ladarius, Ryan, just so you know, Ladarius is a resident Alabama fan. So
I was following the chat a little bit. I kind of got those vibes a little bit.
Yeah. Good guy. Hope your mom's doing better or is at peace, whatever the case may be. Buddy, we were certainly praying for her for sure. So glad that you're still with us. All right. Blaine Tiller, do you prefer 3-3-5 or 4-2-5 defense? Do you have a preference on that, Ryan?
I'm always an even man front guy. Like I think that 3-3-5 can get tricky sometimes. I feel like you get stuck sometimes in some pressure package situations. Like 4-2-5, I can always get 4 after the quarterback without much thinking or much changing during a play. So I prefer 4-2-5 personally. And I was a big Gary Patterson guy back in the day, so I kind of just had the 4-2-5 close to my heart. So
my answer, do I prefer 3-3-5 or 4-2-5 defense is yes. I think you need to be able to do both. You have to be flexible in today's game, especially at Notre Dame, because in a lot of these leagues, there's some carryover between teams, right? Everybody's trying to copy the big dog, right? At Notre Dame, they're going to play a Big 12 team one week, an SEC team the next, a Big 10 team the next, a Pac-12 team the next. You have to have flexibility. You're going to play North Carolina one week, and we talked about it this year. There's a stretch during the season this year where Notre Dame has back-to-back games against air raid teams whose air raids don't look anything alike in USC and North Carolina. And then the next week, you're going to play the triple option, right? Like that's 3 distinctly different offenses. And then you finish the regular season up with David Shaw and his pro-style offense, completely different offense. And then early in the year, you're playing Wisconsin, completely different type of offense. And so I think you have to be flexible. And there's times when I love a 3-3-5. There's times when I love a 4-2-5. Me personally, my base would be 4-2-5. I'm a 4-down guy, but I think in today's game, if you don't have the ability to go to some sort of 3-down, then I don't think you can match up against everybody. And I'm also someone who, as a 3-down, believes you're moving guys around to still bring 4 to 5 man pressures. You're just bringing them from different places. So I like that flexibility. I like that versatility. I think especially for a team like Notre Dame, you need to have that flexibility because you need to be able to match up with Wisconsin one week and North Carolina the next, or Clemson the next, or Ohio State the next, which is going to look a whole lot different stylistically and personnel-wise and all those kind of things.
Sure.
All right, so let me see here. DMND13, can we have a show with creative play designs you would like for the offense in 2022? Let me write that down. All right. That's a good football 101 show.
Well, you already gave an example last time, right, Brian? You said you wanted a
Oh,
diamond pistol.
And man, I've said that so many times this year. And like I said, I want to see Avery Davis and the Wildcat. Like, there's all types of fun things, but I think this would be good because we could do it in a football 101 where we can actually, pull up some video and use some examples and things like that. I'll be honest with you, it would have to be a show that's on the message board only, because anytime I use video, this Exo Sports company dings it, even though yesterday I was not using anything they had, and I'm using video that Notre Dame gave Alex Bars to use for a highlight video that I made for him, because they wanted to be able to do that. They still put a claim on it, and so we weren't monetized for yesterday's show. So that's why we don't do video. It's exactly why we don't do video. I don't care, because I thought it was a great show and doing that stuff was needed. And if that means for every now and then we have a show not monetized, but I just can't do it all the time because, I can't work for free. My wife won't let me. So I apologize. And Ryan, I tried to convince Ryan not to take a paycheck, but
4 a.m.
he was really a stickler. What's funny is you were just getting up and I was just going to bed.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't even tell my wife about that. I should have asked her. Be like, babe, is it okay if I work for free? Oh, no,
yeah.
Okay, cool.
No, all right. Okay, that's fine. So I tried everybody. I tried to get him work for free, and he wasn't down with it. So I apologize in advance. It's all his fault, by the way. It's all Ryan's fault. All righty, let me get down here. Okay, Blaine cleared it up because I couldn't tell what he was saying at first. With our current roster, do you prefer 3-3-5 or 4-2-5? That's a little bit different. I am definitely in the 4-2-5 category with the current roster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a couple years, when you've got Aiden Gabira and Tyson Ford and then all those linebackers, I may want to change my tune up a little bit. But right now, the current personnel with Foskey, I'm definitely base 4-2-5. That you always still want to have the flexibility, but I have more of a strong opinion on the two when you look at it from a current personnel standpoint. No question about it. All right, let me get down here. So I think we're about at that time where it's time to answer some recruiting questions. And Ladarius talking about commitments. He says they don't have any commitments. He says we're trying to flip Keeley though. Ladarius, I'm just going to give you a little heads up. If Alabama does somehow flip Keon Keeley, I would encourage you not to join the chat for a few days, for a few weeks.
It's going to be very, very sad.
This group is not going to be as welcoming to you. That is a question, however, that we've been asked a lot, and I do want to address that because we're getting a lot of people asking. Corey D says, what's the latest regarding Keon Keeley? It's going to be tough holding on to him. He's a stud. I think that I'm going to say it. I kind of texted a friend of mine this yesterday kind of jokingly, and I said, look, Notre Dame fans are like kind of talk. I love y'all, but we're all talking kind of out of both sides of our mouth right now, right? We say we want Notre Dame to recruit elite players. And then they recruit and get commitments from elite players like Keon Keeley and Drake Bowen and Justin Rhett and Peyton Bowen. And then those elite players act like elite players act, which is, I still want to take visits. I still want to enjoy this experience. I have other schools calling. Yeah, Bama's calling me. When Bama calls, you listen, And then it's like, wait a minute. Well, hold on a second. Elite players look at other schools and take other visits. Yeah, that's kind of what comes with the territory. When you land a Keon Keeley, guess what? Everyone else is going to still stop recruiting him. They're not going to be, well, Notre Dame got him. That's a bummer for us. No, they're going to still go after him. And every time a kid takes visits, because Peyton Bowen's taking visits, Keon Keeley's probably going to take visits. Justin Rhett said in an article at Irish Breakdown today that he plans on taking visits. That's what big-time players do.
Sure.
They take visits, even if they commit early. So I just want to encourage y'all to, if you're going to say they need to recruit players, then you can't freak out when those kids get offered by big schools or take visits to bigger schools. Keon Keeley is a Notre Dame kid. He's a 3.5 GPA. He's also an elite football player. I think, and if I was a betting man, I believe he's going to pick Notre Dame. I do. I think he loves Notre Dame. There's a reason for that. He had some big time offers when he picked Notre Dame. Do I think he's going to look at other schools from the standpoint of visiting and hearing what they have to say? Sure. Could another school convince him to come there? Sure. I mean, in today's era, anything can happen. Am I as freaking out about losing him as other people, where some seem like it's almost a foregone conclusion that they're going to lose him? No, I'm just not there. I'm not. I think Keon is a great fit at Notre Dame. Keon knows he's a great fit at Notre Dame. I think the hiring of Al Washington should help with that if he can continue to recruit that. And then Marcus Freeman's going to help with that. So let's just kind of take a deep breath and understand that this is what happens when you play big boy football and you recruit against the big boys. This is part of the deal. You're going to lose some of those kids. That's just the nature of it, right? I mean, 5-star kids and top 50 kids flip all the time. But Notre Dame needs to start realizing that they can flip those kids too, right? And get in that game. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say go recruit the best of the best, but only guys who are going to commit, not take any more visits, because that list of top 50 players that are going to do that is like maybe 2, right? Maybe. And they're not committing to Notre Dame. So just take a deep breath and let it play out a little bit, and just have a little faith in Keon. It'd be my big thing, is just have a little bit of faith in him and have a little bit of faith in Peyton Bowen, and say, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for these young men to go see places that they're not going to get to see again. I get it. I mean, I would have said, hey, maybe don't commit early, but I'm going to tell you right now, it'd be a lot harder to land him now that those schools are in the game if he wasn't committed than to keep him as a commitment. So just understand that a little bit too. And I'd say the same thing for Peyton Bowen, the same thing for Justin Rett, in my opinion. So let's get down to a few more questions here. Demetrius Rex with a super chat. Thank you, Demetrius. Excited to see that Freeman met with Dante. He did. He was out at the school this week to meet with him. Q Kibbs with a question for when Ryan comes on, which is now. Have you heard anything on Dante Moore's relationship with Freeman? I know Monday we talked a lot about Moore, but was curious on how that is developing.
Well, like Brian just mentioned, he was out to see him. So obviously there is a point of emphasis for Coach Freeman to continue that relationship. I think, and we keep talking about this, and I don't think anything's really changed on the front that Notre Dame is in this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to have to get him out of the state of Michigan. I understand everybody, Michigan State's in the conversation, Ohio State's there are schools in the conversation. But Dante Moore, like right now, if you ask me, I think it is literally a 50-50 on where he ends up right now. I think Notre Dame is firmly in this game. Marcus Freeman has made it an absolute priority, as well as the rest of the staff, to make this a priority. So no big change since we talked about it last week, but I still think that Notre Dame is in very sound. Yeah, they're in very sound position right now with Dante Moore, and I would not get worried yet about that. So
Sean talked to him recently.
Yeah.
And Brian Smith interviewed him face-to-face. And the one thing that's been a consistent theme in recent months with that is he has a very strong connection with Tommy Rees.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a positive, but having a connection and landing a guy are two different things, obviously. Right. So Coach Rees has to finish. That's why I wrote an article today at Irish Breakdown that I would encourage all of you to check out, because I lay out my case, which we've talked about before. I really, really believe, like I talked about in the show earlier in the week, that they need to fully commit to Dante Moore. Like, I am 99 times out of 100 absolutely against the whole put all your eggs in one basket thing.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of what's needed with a kid like Dante Moore. I feel like they're trying to play. It's like they want to marry Dante, but they're not sure if Dante wants to marry them. So they want to still date other players, right? Like, that's kind of how I look at it. And it's like, no. If that's the dude you want, and if he's the game changer that you think he is, and that I think he is, and I think everybody that knows football thinks that he is, I don't know. Well, I probably shouldn't have said that, because then Ryan's like, I don't think he's that kind of guy, and then it takes like a shot at you. But I think he's a 5-star player. I think he's a game changer. I think he's a program changer in so many ways, on the field and off of it, that I feel you've got to take that risk and say, hey, Jackson Arnold, Chris Vizina, Avery Johnson, we love you guys, but we're only focusing on one quarterback right now. Yeah, you may lose those guys, but you know what? In such a deep quarterback class, there's going to be, if you go out and have the year that we think you're capable of having, there's going to be a kid, a top 100 to 150 guy you can flip. Everybody else does. Oklahoma. If Jackson Arnold would have committed Notre Dame, does anyone think Oklahoma would have stopped recruiting him? Oh, crap, he committed Notre Dame. Shucks, we missed out. No. So why should Notre Dame do that? But for now, I think they got to be all in on Dante. I think to me the only way they're ultimately going to be able to fit him is, look, we want you and we need you. Because I want to go where I'm wanted, not needed, or where I'm needed, not wanted, or whatever. Well, Notre Dame wants and needs you. And I would make that case. And look, I know you need to protect yourself and have other guys, but I think there's a greater chance you end up with nobody if you try to play the field. You try to recruit all these guys and, because then, Jackson's going to think that Dante's your number one. Dante may think Jackson's your number one, depending on which reporter he's listening to and all this other stuff. And then it's like you lose all of them. If I'm going to lose all of them, it's going to be because we picked our guy and we went all in on him, and it just wasn't good enough. But I would say is if you do it right, you will get them. Especially when I think the production's going to be this year. I think we're going to see Tyler Buckner really emerge as a big time quarterback this year and start to show flashes of it. You're going to be able to show Dante between what we did with Jack Cohn and what we're going to do with Tyler Buckner. We can get you here. That's kind of the message from the coaches on that one is you can show him, hey, look, this is how you fit. We don't have to, Tyler's running because that's his skill set. We're not going to run you like we run Tyler. Look at what we did with Jack last year. That kind of thing is how I think the pitch for Notre Dame will be. So I would go all in. I think the connection is there that's strong with Tommy Rees. And all in for me means every opportunity you can get out to see him, you see him. And here's the list of the coaches that need to be out and see Dante Moore. Okay. Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees, Harry Heastan, Chancey Stuckey, John McNulty, Al Washington, Mike Mickens, Chris O'Leary, the running backs coach to be named later, Brian Mason, and the defensive coordinator coach to be named later. Like, to me, that's how all in it is, right? Like, everybody's out to see him. And you're pitching, you have a really good NIL pitch for Dante Moore if that matters to him. There's no more recognizable position in college football, in my opinion, than the quarterback in Notre Dame, right? Use that. So I'm going to double down on saying if you want to get Dante Moore, this is the way to do it. It's all in. And you have to be all in. And if you're not, then you have to understand you're probably not going to get him. And then you're probably going to miss out on the other two guys. Ian Johnson asked, what about Vizina makes him not that dude for Notre Dame other than him not being Dante Moore? That's exactly what it is, right? That's my whole point. He's not Dante Moore. And it's
the same conversation with Jackson Arnold, Avery. Like, you can put all those guys kind of into the same. Like, Chris Vizina is a top 100 recruit by most platforms. He's a good football player. There's no doubt. He could play at Notre Dame. I think he could play at a lot of schools. Like, there's no doubt. It's just the fact of, like, you want things to change for Notre Dame, right? So Notre Dame needs to start landing these guys. I saw someone on the message board earlier that said that they thought Dante Moore for us could be what Deshaun Watson was for Clemson. And I agree. That could be the changing of the guard. That could be the first step in the direction to, like, hey, maybe Watson, then Lawrence. And then, I know DJ Uiagalelei hasn't been quite what they thought he would be, but he was still another 5-star recruit that they have laid the foundation for, right? So I just think that the drop off from Moore to any other quarterback prospect that's on the board right now, or quarterback recruit that's on the board right now, I just think is substantial. Like, if you want a program changing type of move, you need to go for a program changer. That's what he is. I don't think Christopher Vizina is a program changer. I still think he's a good quarterback. Like, if they landed him, I think that we should be very optimistic about what he can accomplish at Notre Dame.
Player,
but I just don't think that he's the caliber as Dante Moore. That's just all it comes down to. So.
It's kind of like this. If you want to use the NFL as an example, right? I look at it and say, there's a lot of good quarterbacks in the NFL. Derek Carr, to me, is a good quarterback. He's a good football player.
For sure.
Right? We can go down this long list of guys. Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan, Mac Jones. There's Ryan Tannehill, Carson Wentz, Matt Stafford. There's good quarterbacks in the NFL. They're not Patrick Mahomes.
Or Josh Allen.
They're not Josh Allen, right? And that's kind of, they're not Justin Herbert and what he potentially could be. They're not Aaron Rodgers in the regular season. Maybe they might be Aaron Rodgers in the postseason, but they're not Aaron Rodgers in the regular season.
Right.
So you can be a really good quarterback, but you're not it's like if you're the number 15 pick in the NFL draft and you play like the number 15 pick, like Mac Jones did, you're a good football player.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the guy that was picked number 1 and plays like number 1, like Joe Burrow, right? I mean, that's the difference. And Chris Vizina would be a really good pickup for Notre Dame, but he's not a program changer.
Right.
He's still a guy that to a degree needs to be surrounded with other really good players like Mac Jones. Mac Jones doesn't go to Clemson and lead Clemson to a national title in 2016. He doesn't.
Right.
He doesn't lead Clemson to a national title in 20. He doesn't. I don't know if he leads LSU to a title in 2019. LSU was loaded, but they needed that elite trigger man, and I don't think Mac is an elite trigger man. He's really good, surrounded by phenomenal talent. Right.
And I was going to say, like, those quarterbacks, a lot of those quarterbacks you named, like, could they win a Super Bowl if all the stars aligned?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they could win a championship, but I don't think that they're the guys that when things aren't perfect, that you want them to be that guy, right? Like, do you ever go into a game right now against Patrick Mahomes and think like, wow, we have the advantage at the most important spot in the league? Like, you just don't.
There's to me one team that can say that now, and Patrick Mahomes still just beat him. Because his team is slightly better.
It makes the margin for error so much smaller when you don't have that guy. Things need to be on script. They need to be on schedule. When it teeters one way or the other, those guys tend to not get it done, right? Because they don't have that ability to elevate. We're talking about elevators versus system players. I know there's a big, like, oh, system quarterback. Like, I get it. Every quarterback is a system quarterback because they play in a particular system.
Right.
But when I think that the stigma about system quarterbacks is guys that can't make a play outside of the structure. Right. Like, that's the difference. And I think Dante Moore is that guy that can be an elevator, the guy that can play outside of the structure. Guys like Christopher Vizina could be very good inside the structure, but when things go wrong around them, because it's not always going to be perfect, especially when the talent level comparative to other big-time schools is around the same. We're not at Alabama's stature sometimes. We're like, hey, they are just better at like every spot sometimes for some teams, right? Like, that's just not what it is right now.
Right.
So what it is for us to win those big games that we keep talking about, right? To win national championships, for me, you need guys that can elevate players around them and they can win outside of structure. They can be what we saw Deshaun Watson for Clemson. Like, that's what Notre Dame needs.
Right now. Like, if you go back to the 2010 NFL season, to your point about Super Bowls. So since 2010, we have seen Joe Flacco win a Super Bowl, right? We saw an aging, not elite anymore, Peyton Manning win a Super Bowl. And we saw Nick Foles / Carson Wentz win a Super Bowl, meaning Carson Wentz in the regular season and then Nick Foles in the postseason. So to your point, you see that occasional, but everything went right? The Broncos had an elite defense, like a special generational defense that year. They had some things going in their favor, right? Same thing with the Ravens. Just some things went in their favor that year. But here's who else won Super Bowls during that period of time. Aaron Rodgers, Eli Manning, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady 4 times, Pat Mahomes. Those are the other guys that won Super Bowls, right? Like, there's more consistently, and you look at it in college football now, you can win with a Mac Jones. You can even occasionally win with a Jacob Coker if things really go right. But more off, who else is winning Super Bowls? Or championships. It's Deshaun Watson. It's Trevor Lawrence. It's Joe Burrow. It's guys like that. You're going to occasionally get a Stetson Bennett in a weird year. But more often than not, especially at a place like Notre Dame, you need that Dante Moore type of player. And so that's why we're adamant about it, because in most years, if he wasn't from Detroit, if he was from Atlanta or Dallas, I'd have a difference of opinion, because I don't know if I doubt you'd get him if he was from there. It's kind of like Jalen Smith. If Jalen Smith was from Miami or Dallas or LA or Atlanta, he probably doesn't come to Notre Dame. But he was in your backyard and you were able to get him. And to me, that's everything about Dante is right there for the take. Good student, smart kid, real savvy kid, elite player, and he's from like 3 hours away from your campus. Notre Dame this region doesn't produce 5-star quarterbacks very often. And when you do, you got to get them. And to me, that's why I'm all in. And I think Dante fits really what Tommy Rees wants to do, in that he's an athletic kid, but he's a passing quarterback. He's a passing quarterback that can make things with his legs, but he is we said it the other day, he's a passer first and a passer second. And ultimately, that's where Tommy Rees wants to take this offense. And, that's more of the Joe Burrow mold than it is the Deshaun Watson mold. But the year that Deshaun was more of a runner, it's the year they lost the championship. The next year, Deshaun became more of a passer and, resulted in some interceptions. But when it mattered, he made the plays he needed to make. And that's just, to me, that's kind of where Dante is. And again, I know that's not necessarily the answer that people want to hear, but I mean, I just think he can be that kind of player. I really do.
I agree on that.
Super chat from Corey D. Thank you, Corey. It's telling that schools aren't knocking the doors down seeking to hire Dell or Quinn. If BK was still here, so would the former and latter. Shame on BK for perpetuating this. So glad he has gone. Pretty much agree on just about everything you said, Corey. I'm not gonna lie to you. Not gonna lie to you. Here's an interesting comment from Richard. It's not really a question so much. Sort of is. If Dante Moore led Notre Dame to its first national championship since 1988, he would be a legend. If you were Tommy, would you use this approach? NIL should be nice too. We talked about the NIL piece.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely do think Notre Dame should use that. I do.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to? I do the same thing with Keon Keeley. Do you want to go win the Saban's 8th national title and you're just another part of the key cog in the, a system that's proven that it can win before you and without you? Or do you want to come here and do something special, something that hasn't been done in, since your parents were little kids? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I would absolutely be selling that 100%. 100%.
A lot of recruits, a lot of kids, they do honestly fall, like they like to hear that too. Because I remember I saw DeMarvin Leal from Texas A&M did an interview, I think on Pro Football Focus, and he asked, like, Alabama was after you, but like, why did you not? And he said, I didn't want to be out on Alabama football player. I wanted to beat Alabama. Like, I think that there are definitely some student athletes, definitely some recruits that also want to be different, right? Like they want to change things, because at some point, I mean, what they've done is just incredible under Nick Saban, but at some point, like, it's going to change, right? Like it can't just stay this forever. And some people want to be the changer that makes that kind of tide flip a little bit. No pun intended there either. No pun on the tide.
But it works. It plays.
Yeah.
That'll play. Yeah. No question about it. No, I think that's a great point, Ryan. And some kids, you want to find those kids though, right?
Yeah.
And that's a selling point to me. Hey, Dante, do you want to come here and be a part of doing something special? Right? Like that's generational, that's going to make you a legend. I mean, there's people that think Tony Rice was a better quarterback than Brady Quinn at Notre Dame and Jimmy Clausen. Why? Because he won a title.
Sure.
Not a lot I can say to that, because he did win a title. But yeah, you win a title at Notre Dame and you're a legend. And that's just the reality of it. A real quick answer to this one. Sean Rogers says, does Notre Dame have any interest in a recent decommit from A&M? Harold Perkins, I know 22 and 23 are loaded with stud LBs, but he is incredible. He's talented. I think Notre Dame has two guys in that mix for him, at that level for him, in my opinion. I think Josh Burnham and Jalen Sneed are also top 50 players. Number one. Number two, no, they're not.
No.
That is he's going to go to the highest bidder type of situation. Let's just be honest about that, right? And so, no, Notre Dame is not in that one. Should not waste a second on that one. And so here's a team one. Super chat, ICURN with Irish Luck. So first of all, thank you for your service now, Mr. ICURN. But do you think, Ryan, I'm going to let you take a crack at this one first, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you think Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey could turn into what Justin Ross and T. Higgins were for Clemson? Is that their ceiling?
So, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking back to Justin Ross's freshman year when he was at his
2018.
Best. Yes. Before the injuries obviously took the toll on him. And he was phenomenal that freshman year, if people remember. I think he had like 1,000 yards and like 40 something catches. Like it was just
that sick one-handed catch in the championship game.
Yeah. When Trevor Lawrence threw that one way behind him and he just plucked it out of nowhere. I don't know if I quite think that Deion and Tobias could get to that level. Like, I mean, because T. Higgins is now a 1,000-yard receiver in the NFL, but even that year, he had near 1,000 yards. And just like, let's be honest, like, and this is just my opinion. I think if Justin Ross never gets hurt, he might be one of the best wide receiver prospects NFL draft wise that we have seen in a few years. Like, that kid was phenomenal when he was a freshman. Unfortunately, the injuries hurt him. So I think that's a little higher than their ceiling, but stylistically, I get it, right? Because they're both skyscrapers. They both kind of do things a little bit differently. Justin Ross was a little more explosive than T. Higgins was, but T. Higgins, had some explosiveness to him, and he had some ball tracking down the field, but back shoulder stuff. So I think that Deion and Tobias can really play off of each other well, and they both have different skill sets despite being a longer athletic guys. But I just think like that year, Justin Ross and T. Higgins were just phenomenal for Clemson. So I don't know if that's quite the same ceiling with that.
What I would say is I don't think they can be that as freshmen, right? I don't think either of them have Justin Ross's freshman potential.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think they could be what Justin was as a freshman by the time they're seniors? Yeah, I do. I think that, because like what you said was like his up NFL potentials, this, and this. He was still a kind of a raw player as a freshman, and he was just getting by on God-given ability. So what they lack in that, they could make up for by their junior year and savviness and route running and experience and those kind of things. But I do think I do think that Tobias Merriweather has T. Higgins potential. I do, and that's the comp that I've made for him from the moment I first saw his film when he was a sophomore. Was that kid reminds me of a faster version of T. Higgins. Because T. Higgins isn't a burner. I mean, he was a 4.54 at the pro day at Clemson. I think something like a mid 4.5 guy.
He's more like I'm going to stack you with size and play the back shoulder. Like that's what he is. He's not a vertical separator.
Right.
Yeah.
If you look at Tobias at this, and you go back and watch T's high school film, to me, Tobias is just plays faster in my opinion than T. So I think he can be that kind of guy. I think Deion is the wild card in this whole thing. Because Deion is a lower floor, really high ceiling guy. If Deion plays to his potential, I think the better comparison is a combination that didn't actually play together. I would say it's T. Higgins and
Mike Williams.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was trying to remember the name of them. But
I like body type and play style. I like that comparison a little bit between.
There's none of the guys in Notre Dame as explosive as Justin Ross was. That's why it's tough for me to because he just had that elite before the injuries. He had elite speed as a 6'4" guy.
Yeah, he was like a legit 4'4" dude.
Yeah,
6'4". Like he was blazing.
And I don't think those two guys. Deion's not that right now. Right. Now Deion's going to be the same age that Justin was as a freshman next year, right? Because Deion's younger, but I just don't see Deion being that guy yet. I think Deion could be a Mike Williams type down the road as well, but he's going to need a little bit more time. But I think that would be the Clemson combination. I'm going to tell you something right now. If it was Mike Williams and T. Higgins together in 2018, the results don't change a whole lot. You know what I mean? Because Mike Williams was that guy. He was their top receiver in 2016 when they won the title. So yeah, I think that Notre Dame. Now, impact-wise, could they have a similar impact to those two guys? Yes. I just don't think it's going to be as freshmen and sophomores. Like, I don't think Deion as a sophomore is going to be what T. Higgins was as a sophomore. And I don't think Tobias as a freshman is going to be what Justin was as a freshman. I think by sophomore, junior, senior, that's when we could start to see them have the same impact. So, and to me, that's the difference between a 5-star now and a 5-star upside. Justin Ross was a 5-star upside, but he's also a 5-star the minute he stepped foot on campus.
Right.
Tobias is more of a really good top 50 guy now, but it's going to need a year of physical development and different things to kind of get to that 5-star production, 5-star impact type of level. And that's why I created the two system, because not all 5-stars in college are built the same. Some of them are guys that need time. Some of them are guys that are 5-stars the day they step foot on campus.
Sure.
And that's a difference to me.
And I think the offense obviously is not going to dictate for Tobias and Deion to be those guys right now, right? Like you have Michael Mayer, you have Lorenzo Styles. Like you don't have to have Tobias and Deion to be those guys either. So.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point because I think, the complementary weapons are going to be pretty good. Right. Yeah. I mean, Lorenzo Styles, he's got a much higher ceiling than Hunter Renfrow, in my opinion. Now, Hunter's has turned out to be a pretty good football player, but
very good
if you're going to tell me who would you rather have, Hunter Renfrow or Lorenzo Styles with the same coaching, I'm sorry, I'm taking Lorenzo Styles, right? I mean, so they didn't have Michael Mayer at tight end on that team, right? And so, yeah, I think the line play is going to be better. Clemson's O-line in 16 and 18 were good, well coached, just tough kids. There's no high draft picks on there. What was it? John Simpson in round 4? I think is like the highest pick they had, right?
They had Mitch Hyatt, who was like a 4-time All-American and didn't even get drafted. I mean, yeah.
Is he on a roster right now?
I don't think so. I mean, he might be on a practice squad somewhere, but I don't think he's on an active roster now.
Yeah, so those are to me the interesting things about that one is when you look at those kind of things. So it's a really good question. I really like that question. Here's one from Keon. Keon asks, "Are there any recruits with a good junior day that could be on commit watch?" I'm gonna let you answer that one, Ryan.
I mean, I think it's so. So if you're not on the premium message board, first and foremost, I did post the list. I think we have 20 guys verified through us that will be there. I would say if you're asking me who has the best chance of being on commit watch, I would say, and I don't want to force this, but I think Ronan Hannafin, who is the wide receiver / defensive back, that is an interesting player because we had him on our wide receiver board because that's where he's listed on every single recruiting platform. But then I touched in with Ronan, and he said that they offered him as an athlete. And when you watch his film, like I texted Brian, I'm like, dude could probably be a better rover than he is a wide receiver. And I think he could probably be a good wide receiver too. Like,
yeah. And there are some people at Notre Dame that view him that way.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot like Xavier Watts, Ryan, that you're going to have the battle. If the battle could be more as opposed to Notre Dame versus another school, the battle could be who wins out, Tommy Reese and Chancey Stuckey, or Chris O'Leary, whoever the linebacker coach is, that kind of thing. I think that could end up being an interesting battle.
Yep. And I think Hannafin is also a guy that the coaches would take right now. And I think that because that flexibility, I think, is big time too. Because I think this kid, because he plays up north, right? So like he's not in front of eyes as much, but like I think that he could really rise because he's supposedly a 4'4" kid at 6'3", 205 pounds, right? So I think that there's upside with a guy like Ronan Hannafin. I think that the coaches like him. I think he really likes Notre Dame. So if you told me that he committed after this weekend, I would believe you. I think that there's a possibility for that. One other guy that I think I would like to see, and this is fully dependent on if he's a take for Notre Dame, I think Caden Fegan, the running back, who is also being, again, if you look at at his recruiting ranking, he is everywhere as a linebacker. I think On three had him as like a top 100 linebacker.
Yeah, On three has him as a top 100 guy.
Yeah. And I don't think that he's quite that, but I will say, because he plays in a lower level and in Illinois ball. And I mean, if you watch his highlight tapes, like I told my wife yesterday, I'm like, when I want a good laugh, I'm going to watch these guys try to tackle Caden Fegan because he is 6'3", 220, 225 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. A guy that is being targeted by Notre Dame as a running back right now. And when you kind of compare him to a guy like that we have in the class right now in Cedric Irvin Jr., Cedric's a little bit of a smaller back, like could develop maybe into, a 200+ pound back. But getting a guy like him, Fegan speaking, at that type of size, I think would be a cool compliment to kind of take a look at. And he loves Notre Dame. He has been, and I just had an article that popped on Irish Breakdown about it. He's been to the campus 5 times, and he's going to be at junior day for 6 times. So I think if Notre Dame wants to take him, if they make a push here and they say, like, yes, we'll take you right now, I think Caden Fegan could also be on commit watch. So Fegan, Hannafin are a couple guys that really pop out to me as that I think on Hannafin's side, Notre Dame really want. I think that they would be a take right now, and I think that Ronan reciprocates that interest. And then I think Caden Fegan's a guy that he has high interest in Notre Dame. I just would like to see how much of a take he would be from Notre Dame right now. I'm a little unsure as to where they are on that.
And we're not predicting that Roman Hannafin is going to commit this weekend.
Nope.
Ronan Hannafin
most likely commits on commit watch. Yep.
I personally, based on some conversations I had, I'd be a little surprised if they pushed for Caden Fegan this weekend. And I think right now he's more of a running back for them, and they've already got a running back. So I think they want to kind of see how can they get Justice Haynes back on campus? Can they get Jaden Lamar on campus? So I don't know if he would necessarily, because I don't know if both sides of the ball love him as much on both sides as Ronan Hannafin is loved by both coaches on both sides.
Yeah.
That would be my question. And I like Caden Fegan. He's an explosive kid. I think he's a little bit tight, a little bit tightly wound. So I don't know if his projection on defense is as good as Ronan Hannafin's is on both sides of the ball. Because I think Ronan's a more fluid, smooth athlete. Yeah. And I think, and that would be kind of just, that's my 2 cents. That's my opinion. But Ronan Hannafin is a 3-star kid. Let's be honest. He's got a good offer list. Ohio State just offered, but it's not like Alabama, but I don't care. That kid can play. And that's one of those kids, like, you throw the star ranking aside because he's from flipping Massachusetts, right?
Absolutely.
If that kid was playing in Atlanta, Miami, Dallas, LA, that's a top 150 kid, in my opinion. Top 200 at worst, in my opinion. You don't have many kids that grade out as 4-star players on both sides of the ball. And to me, he does. I think he could be a 4-star defensive player. Yeah. Like a safety rover type. He is what Notre Dame fans thought Nolan Ziegler could be. Because I think Nolan's more of a pure linebacker. Yeah. That played safety in high school because he's so athletic. I think Ronan could actually be a safety.
Could be.
Although I think he could, I think his body's, when you look at his body, I think he's going to grow into more of a rover type. Just body type wise. Yep. But he could be a safety if he somehow was able to stay streamlined to a degree. For sure. He looks a lot like Harrison Smith, like body type wise. Yeah. When Harrison was at Notre Dame. The problem is Ronan's a junior in high school and he's probably going to keep filling out, right? Sure. But that would be my thing. But that would be a good take in my opinion.
Yeah, because Ronan is already 6'3", 205, right? Like, you're going to blink your eyes, he's going to be 215, 220. Like, that's
right. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what Harrison was by his second, third year at Notre Dame. Absolutely. And that kid's as a junior. So, yeah, that's an interesting one.
But just for the fun of it, though, even if he doesn't end up at Notre Dame, go watch Caden Fegan's highlight because it is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Corey D with a question. Does Keon Keeley seem to be the type of kid who would prioritize money NIL opportunities over what Notre Dame provides? Or does he seem to be a Notre Dame kid? I'm worried that schools are going to throw cash at him. Can I speak to this first, Ryan?
Sure.
I don't think this is an either or conversation.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think that you have to separate those two. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right. Yep. He is a Notre Dame kid that would also be foolish to ignore those possibilities.
Earning potential.
And the other thing I think people are missing, and I'm going to keep saying this, just because Notre Dame's not out broadcasting what they're doing with NIL money, folks, I'm telling you, Notre Dame kids are making money, okay? I was just told this by somebody who's was a parent of a player who is making a similar deal for their kid, that one of Notre Dame's top players is getting ready to do a relatively high 5-star signing bonus for a company that he's going to do some stuff with. Signing bonus. Y'all understand what a signing bonus is, right? That's just what we're paying you right now. Okay. And it's like, it wasn't that long ago that his signing bonus is what I made in a year. Okay. You get what I'm saying? So Notre Dame's just not doing the whole advertising on social media thing. But Keon Keeley, Isaiah Foskey made some money this year as a first-year starter. I've read, I said it last week, early in the week, I've read multiple stories that said Kyle Hamilton was one of the highest paid players in college football this year. Notre Dame is talking to these kids about their NIL opportunities. Trust me, they are. Ryan, you know that. I know that. They're just not broadcasting it. So it's not like a go to Notre Dame and get a great education and be developed and all that, or take money from somewhere else. You can do both of those at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is talking to kids about that. So I think we got to get out of our heads that Notre Dame's offering nothing but a great education and A&M's paying players. Notre Dame is offering kids tremendous opportunities. They're just doing it within the rules, which is we can't facilitate it as a means to you coming to our school. That by the rule is not supposed to happen. Okay. You're not supposed to use it as an enticement to get a kid to sign. And as these kids start to understand their power more, they're going to understand you don't need Texas A&M to get that deal. You don't need Bama to get that deal. Your power, your name, your image, your likeness goes with you wherever you go if you're a 5-star player. So, hey, Keon Keeley, if some school says, hey, we can get you $1 million, brother, if they can get you $1 million, so can every other school that you could go to.
Right.
Right? They're just the only ones trying to entice you with it. That's the difference. And so that is the thing. I don't think this is an either or, Ryan. And you said the same thing.
Yeah.
He is a Notre Dame kid. And anyone that spent 5 minutes around Keon Keeley knows he's a Notre Dame kid. Yeah. But I also think what you have to understand, and I've said this before, Notre Dame kids tend to be smart and thoughtful. Smart and thoughtful kids take all factors into their decision for the next, because they understand more than anybody how important this decision is in their lives. And they're going to make sure, okay, I love Notre Dame, but you know what? I'd be doing myself a disservice if I didn't at least go see what Bama has to offer. Right? Because what Bama can tell is, hey, did you watch Will Anderson this year? That's you.
Yeah.
Right? And that matters, man. And he'd be foolish not to at least consider it. But I think what could also happen is, if I'm going to play devil's advocate to the panic is going on, I think Keon could go there and be like, you know what, man, Bama's a special place, but this visit solidified what makes Notre Dame different. And that's where I want to be.
And I mean, all I was going to say was that you can't, you don't have to separate these things, right? It's not prioritizing NAL or being a Notre Dame guy. Like Notre Dame guys could want to make money too. Like everybody wants to make
There's
money.
There's nothing wrong with that, right?
You think the 4 for 40 that Notre Dame stands by is just about being a good person? No, it's about putting yourself in position to make a career and to make money. Like it's all driven by money. Like let's call it what it is. But this is a short term versus a long term. Because if a school's offering me a lot up front, I guarantee they don't give me quite the education to take advantage of those opportunities, right? Because they're not confident in that selling pitch. Notre Dame, I think, can offer you, hey, you're going to play high quality football. You can be a great athlete on a team that can compete for championships here in the future. And also, we will educate you on how to use your name, image, and likeness. I think, like Brian said, guys like Kyle Hamilton, Isaiah Foskey are already showing that you can make money at Notre Dame. There's no problem. You're not getting a handout at the beginning, but you're also getting the education to better use your resources to make that money long term.
As I've said before, Jason Adamiola is going to make 6 figures this year. I mean, that's on really good authority. I mean, that's what we were told, you can say this, you can tell people this. But I'm telling you, Notre Dame players are making money. I mean, you don't think Notre Dame's offensive lineman did pretty well last year? They had like 8 different deals that people signed with them for the whole group. You know, so I just think we have to stop. We have to be more factual with things, and we have to stop assuming that every kid. These kids aren't all the same. They don't all think the same. They don't all act the same. They don't all have the same values. So there's this thought, well, if this guy's a 5-star, he must only care about NIL. Some do. Jalen Sneed didn't. You don't think Jalen Sneed was offered some big immediate deals to sign with people? You don't think that was the case? It was. You know what I mean? We have to stop that and not assume that every kid's just going to go to the highest bidder. Some kids will. That's why we said they're not going to look at Harold Perkins. You learn who those kids are and you don't go after them. But that's always been true. Look, money didn't just start coming into college sports, right? Yeah. Go watch Pony Excess, okay? That was in the 80s. And that stuff was dirty going on back then. I mean, go look at Eric Dickerson's Trans Am offer from Texas A&M. What was it?
Gold Trans Am.
Yeah, right? Go look into that. You know, that's back in the 80s. Okay, this has been going on a long time. And you know what? Notre Dame didn't pay players back then when they had like 3 straight #1 recruiting classes, right? And that's what we have to understand is not every kid has the same agenda. And Notre Dame isn't just, hey, look, you'll get your money in 40 years. Don't worry. No, it's do both. It's being at Notre Dame means we're going to turn your $200,000 into $2 million, right? That's the thing. Or we're going to turn your $500,000 into $5 million or whatever the case may be. Then you're going to have a Notre Dame degree. You're going to then be able to take the money you're going to make in the NFL, invest it, do what Todd Light did, do what Jerome Bettis did, and make just as much money post-career as you did pre-career, where you can go to this other school, which won't be named, in the southern state, where those kids make, these NFL money. By the time they're 40, they're dead broke, and that's the pitch. But this isn't an either or situation. And I appreciate you asking the question, Corey, because it does allow us to kind of address it a little bit. Sure. Jeff DeMonk says, Brian, to back up your transfer point, I went to a state 2-year college, graduated with a 3.9 GPA. Notre Dame wouldn't accept transfer into Mendoza unless I wanted to start over as a freshman.
Wow.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. Here's an interesting one. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Ryan. Eric Fasano asked Blake Fisher's ceiling in terms of former players, and he offers Ronnie Stanley as one.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this: ceiling as far as impact, not position fit. I want to give you that expanded aspect as well.
I'm just trying to think. I don't have a great one for it. I don't honestly. Ronnie Stanley makes sense because I think that he has a potential to be a dominant football player. I don't think it's quite to the dominance of a guy like a Quentin Nelson because, I mean, Quentin's one of the best offensive linemen we have seen just in college football over the last 10 to 15 years, regardless of position. So I guess I'll go with Ronnie Stanley. I'll steal yours there, Eric. I think that that's a very solid because I think he could be a really great player. I think that he could be that like Ronnie Stanley was a top 10 to 15 pick. Like I think he has that type of upside, but I just don't know if I quite see Quentin Nelson upside. So I'll steal yours.
I think he's closer to Quentin Nelson than he is Ronnie Stanley. And I don't think he is Quentin, but I think he can be. And here's the reason I say that is Ronnie coming out of Notre Dame was pretty much he was great at one thing, not at another. He was a good run blocker coming out of college, but he wasn't a great one. He was more of a pass blocker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he was a high pick. And we talked about it earlier in the show, Ryan, too, is people forget that Ronnie is not getting picked sixth if Laramie Tunsil's not an idiot.
Sure.
Right? I mean, Tunsil was going to be the number one offensive lineman taken in that draft if it wasn't for his issues.
No doubt.
The other part, too, is to me, the reason I think Quentin is more of a proper fit upside-wise than Stanley is I think Blake Fisher can be an elite two-way blocker.
Guard, yeah.
Not guard, he can be great in the run game and pass game. Where Ronnie was a good run blocker, but a great pass blocker, right? Mm-hmm. Q was a great at both. In the NFL, he's great at both. Zach Martin's great at both. I haven't watched Ronnie a ton in the NFL. Maybe he became a much better run blocker. I don't know. But in college, he was much better at one than he was the other. I also think Ronnie was drafted a lot on potential. I don't think Ronnie was ever as polished as Q was in college either. I mean, Ronnie would give up a bad sack. You know, I mean, he gave up, I think, 4 sacks his senior year at Notre Dame. I remember him struggling a little bit with Shaq Lawson. And who was the other big end that they had on that 2015 D-line?
Kevin Dodd.
Yes, that's the other one. Yeah, had some struggles in that game. Ronnie was still in a developing player.
Yeah.
He just was very, very talented, and he came with the Harry Hiestand seal of approval, right? And so that's why he was the top 10 pick. I think Blake could, if Blake stays to his senior year, especially if he stays to his senior year, barring injury, I mean, he's going to be really good, you know. But I think Blake's a kid that we could see him be that rare Notre Dame lineman that leaves as a junior. I could see that.
Fair.
If he stays to his senior year, I'll say this, if he leaves as a junior, he's going to be more Ronnie Stanley than Quentin Nelson. If he stays to his senior year and gets 3 years under Harry Hiestand, he'll be closer to Quentin Nelson than he is Ronnie Stanley, in my opinion. That's what I'll say. That's what I'll say. So, and that's high praise because, like you said, Quentin Nelson's a generational player. So I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Quentin, but I think he can have a chance to be. He has a chance to be the best player at his position by the time he's ready to go in the NFL draft. Here's an interesting one, kind of along those lines, from Toe Jam 1992. Does the instruction Harry Hiestand give the line benefit the run game or the pass game more?
Yes.
If I had to pick one, I'm saying run game. Yes.
Well, yeah, for what it is right now, absolutely, yeah. But yes, he's a great offensive line coach in general. He's going to improve both ways there.
Oh, yes. Joseph Steve says, do you know why Jay Bramlett transferred? A serious loss, in my opinion, because he was a weapon. I don't agree with your I think Jay at times was really good. Jay was also very inconsistent.
Up and down,
And we saw that in the perfect example is he had a couple early boots in the Fiesta Bowl that were really impressive, and then he had a couple, like in the second half, part of Oklahoma State's comeback was aided by 2 really short punts by him that gave Oklahoma State really short field. So he's a very inconsistent player. It was really just about getting closer to home and being at a place that was a little bit more, comfortable. I don't think Jay ever felt comfortable being an Alabama kid coming up Notre Dame. Some kids just never quite adapt, and I think he was kind of part of that. And so I think that's why he ended up going back home. Rob Lobo 123. Do you think Al Golden can be an elite coach at Notre Dame?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
I do. So elite for what he's going to be asked to do when everything is kind of formulated to being on the coaching side and the recruiting side. I've talked to a couple people now in NFL circles, former scout that was not around Al, but has friends that were around Al, and they had a glowing endorsement for Al. And I put this on the message board. I guess it was last week or the week before, and he praised him not only as an X's and O's guy, which I know, there's going to be some hesitation because, I mean, Brian, what was the last time you called a defense? Was it 2005?
05.
05, yeah. So there's going to be some hesitation in that aspect. Like, he hasn't called a defense in a long time. What's that going to look like for Notre Dame? But they spoke praises not only from an X's and O's, but from a personality perspective and a recruiting perspective.
Mhm.
And I had saw Al firsthand when he was at Temple. And let me tell you, like, there was a string of Temple coaches that had done a nice job, Jeff Collins and some of these guys. Al Golden took over a terrible program, like an absolutely awful program. And he rebuilt that thing from I think they went 1-11 the year before he got there, the year that he was first there. So I think that Al Golden is going to do a terrific job if he is indeed the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, because I think that he's going to try to check a lot of boxes. He's a very personable guy. He's a good recruiter. He's a good defensive mind. When you put all those things together, I think that he can be an elite coach in the sense that he is good at all these multiple things. Do I necessarily know if he's going to be an elite play caller on defense? No, I don't know that 100%. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just taking when we kind of add up everything all together, because I don't think that necessarily every elite player or coach has to be elite at every single thing, right? When you kind of add things up and it kind of builds off one another, then we can get to an elite level. So I think that he's just going to kind of check a lot of boxes if he is indeed the defense coordinator at Notre Dame.
I think to be elite, you have to be kind of elite at the most important things at your job. And so I think you need to be an elite play caller or game planner, at least one of those two, right?
Sure.
And an elite recruiter. I think it needs to be involved. So I would not say he can be elite because I don't have confidence just from a lack of seeing him. I mean, even at Virginia, they had good defenses, but not great defenses. And they recruited some real, it had Chris Long, Ahmad Brooks, Kai Parham. I mean, he signed 2 5-star linebackers in one class in Virginia, Kai Parham and Ahmad Brooks. So I think he's got a potential to be an elite recruiter, to his point. Very engaging guy, very likable guy, can relate to young people really well, very naturally, does so very naturally. He's an authentic, and part of his guys like that can be 52 and great recruiters are usually guys that are really authentic. And I think Al's a real authentic guy. And I think that kind of hurt him a little bit in Miami, to be honest with you. And I thought that was a bad fit. I've said this before. You got taking head coaching jobs, you got to go to the right fit. And Al Golden at Miami was a bad fit. It's like when Tom O'Brien left Boston College to go to NC State, I was like, what are you thinking? Or when Randy Edsall went from UConn to Maryland. I'm like, dude, this is I know it's not that far away, but this is a different world, recruiting Baltimore and DC and, places like that for kids at Maryland compared to UConn. You can, it's like Mike Bobo. You left Georgia to go to Colorado State. Well, you just got hired as Georgia's receivers coach. So you've come full circle back to Georgia, and you're not even at the job you had when you left. Right. Because you took a bad job. You took a job where you are not a fit there.
Yeah.
And that's to say is that some of these and coaches are getting smarter about that now that the money is so much better at some of the smaller schools. Is coaches like, hey, like Gary Patterson was great about this. I could go to Texas and make a lot more money, but I don't know.
Why would you?
Pass.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so, I think the fit has to be there. I think he'll fit much better at Notre Dame. He's a Jersey kid, played at Penn State. He coaches had his best success was at an academic institution like Virginia. I think he's going to fit in really great at Notre Dame. I just can't go to elite because I have no idea if he's going to be able to be an elite game planner, play caller. You've heard some things that make him, and that's I love it, and I'm glad. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah,
I just don't have those same contacts, so it's like I just don't have that now.
Yeah.
If your sources are correct on that, then sure, because I don't think the recruiting piece is going to be a problem.
No.
I'm more concerned about the game planning, but I'm not concerned about it from this is a bad hire standpoint, because again, let's not forget that there's a dude right down the hall who knows a thing or two about defense.
For sure.
Right. And the D-line coach was offered the D coordinator job at Tennessee a year ago. Right. The cornerbacks coach knows what the head coach likes in defense. they're going to be fine. I
Right.
just hope he doesn't try to build a 3-4 defense. That's my whole thing. That's my big concern. And he's done both.
Yeah.
They were a 3-4 at Temple in Virginia. They were a 4 down at Miami. Cincinnati is a 4-2-5 1 down and a 3-4 the next. Like, I watched film of them playing. Who was it? It was it Tennessee, and they're just lined up in old school 3-4 stuff. Well, when you're playing Tennessee with Derrick Henry, it makes sense.
Right.
Then you watch them against the Chiefs, and they're 4-2-5 the whole game, basically. So I actually kind of like that he can eat. So yeah. So that's my hope, is that he's more of a, that he's adjusted to the modern defenses and his philosophy of what he wants to do. That would be but look, the reality is if he wants to run a 3-4 and he's dead set on being a 3-4 guy, he's not getting the job.
Right.
So it won't matter anyway. That's what I kind of keep telling myself anyway. So maybe I could be wrong. So B-Straw asks, of all the coaching changes this offseason, which program do you think made the best choice?
The coaching changes this offseason.
I'm assuming he's thinking like head coaching changes. So let's take Marcus.
I love the Notre Dame one.
Let's take that one out of the equation, because I really do think that was a great hire in so many ways. But let's take Notre Dame out of the equation. I loved Miami's hire. Speaking of Miami, I think Miami is a tough place to win now. It's not like it used to be. You don't have your own campus, your own stadium. You got to drive I think it's like 30 plus minutes from campus at least to get to the stadium. You're at an institution where what the athletic department wants and what the institution wants it's almost like Notre Dame post Lou Holtz. The academic people don't want football. The football people still want it to be what it used to be. I think if anybody understands that, and if anybody can be a mover in that regard, I think it's Cristobal. I don't think Cristobal is a great coach. He's a good coach. And I think he's a great recruiter. Yeah. And he's going to be able to recruit a lot more effectively, in my opinion, at Miami than he will at other places. A sneaky good hire. Mm-hmm. And this may just me being biased.
Okay.
I think Mike Elko going to Duke was a really good hire.
Okay.
And here's why I'll say that. He's recruited at places where it's not easy to recruit, Wake Forest being one. He is recruited at an academic institution, Notre Dame. Wake has some decent standards there, and he's an Ivy League guy. I mean, let's not forget Mike Elko went to Penn, right? He's a smart dude. He's a tenacious recruiter, in my opinion. He's a really smart football coach that has a history of knowing how to get good production from units that don't have great talent. I mean, he didn't get to Notre Dame because he had elite players at Wake Forest and turned them into a great defense. He turned underrated kids that he was able to convince to Wake Forest into those guys, right? So he was able – what was the DN that they had that was a really good player? Duke something, right, at Wake Forest.
Oh, Ejiofor.
Yes. Thomas Brown at Rover. They had that line. They had Justin Strnad. They had the other linebacker that I liked that got drafted, a kid that had all those tackles in 2016 or 2015. I mean, Kevin Johnson at corner, right? Like, they were able to find some diamonds in the rough.
Jesse Bates.
Jesse Bates from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Good job, Notre Dame. Yeah. But, that's a lot of NFL dudes in a short period of time that he was able to identify, recruit, and then coach up. That's what you got to do at Duke. You're not going to go because he's a Duke, they're not going to beat Notre Dame for a top 100 player. It's about finding those kids that fit what you do and then coaching them up. And I think he's going to do a good job there. I really do. I think that was a really strong hire, in my opinion. Are there any other kind of hires that you saw that you thought, boy, that was a really strong coaching hire?
Well, I mean, I'm going to leave USC out of it because I think upgrading from Clay Helton to Lincoln Riley is obviously notable. I don't think I have to go too hard at two that I did like, though, outside of those is I like Kalen DeBoer, the former Fresno State coach, going to Washington. I think he's a very smart mind, and I think that he's going to do a good job for what the talent that he had at Fresno, which he developed some good football players. I think that he really can kind of get that program turned around, especially offensively, pretty quickly there. And then the last guy, which is a little bit of a sneaky one that I did not like, to be honest with you, when it first happened, just to preface this, But Brent Pry, who is now the head coach at Virginia Tech, who is the Penn State defensive coordinator, who obviously did a very good job developing on that defensive side of the football. He has historically recruited Virginia fantastically when he was at Penn State. So I think him getting down to Virginia Tech and keeping some of that talent potentially in Virginia, sneaky good hire, Brent Pry, who a guy that I wasn't like when that first happened, I was just like Brent Pry, like defensive coordinator, okay. But then you kind of
they're not even that good on defense.
Right. But then you see the recruiting background, keeping those kids in Virginia potentially. Like I think there's a lot of layers to Brent Pry kind of going down there. I think it could be interesting. I kind of like Billy Napier in Florida, to be honest with you. I kind of like it. I'm curious because that one's a little like, is he ready for
He's
that?
He's going to be boom or bust.
Yeah, is he going to be ready for that? But everybody I've heard from just says like, dude runs a program extremely well. Now, obviously, Florida's a lot different than coaching at Louisiana Lafayette, but
he's coached in the SEC before, right? That's the thing. It's not like he's never been in the SEC. He doesn't know what he's getting into. I hated the Oregon hire of Dan Lanning.
I know.
No kind of fit. Like, I didn't like that hire at all. The Kalen DeBoer hire, the only concern I have, and it's not a concern, the only question I have, I don't know what kind of recruiter he is. I have no idea. But you talked about what he did at Fresno. I think what he did at Indiana in a year was very underrated because people ranked Indiana high coming into the season based on what they did the 1 year he was there with Michael Penix, right? And I thought he did a really good job. He was on my Notre Dame radar a couple years ago when Tommy Rees or when Chip Long left. He was this is a guy that I would look at kind of guy if I'm Notre Dame. He ended up going to Indiana, but did a great job this year at Fresno, turned them around pretty quickly. I just don't know what kind of recruiter he is. That'd be my only hesitation. It's why I didn't comment on it as an offensive coordinator. He's bringing something, and they need that because their offenses have been pretty abysmal for a few years now.
And that's why I kind of like the fit is because Washington's defense has not been the issue over the last few years, right? So, like, if we get that offensive side of the football turned around, then we're looking pretty good. I would say a couple that I did not like because I pulled up a list. I'm just like UConn with Jim Moore Jr., Don Brown up to UMass. I'm just kind of like, man, I understand they're lower level programs, so like, okay, but still,
UMass needs to go back to FCS.
They really do.
It's so bad. They're so bad. Yeah. I'm curious to see how Dan Lanning's going to do because I really didn't like that hire. He's been in the Southeast his whole career. He's 35. It's like he's going across the country. It's just like, and I still wonder how much of that defense success was him and how much of it was Kirby.
Yeah. And I mean, when you got those types of dudes, sometimes like it's also a debate between X's or the O's or Jimmy's or the Joes, right? Like,
and that was my final point. He won't have the recruiting budget at Oregon that he had at Georgia, if you catch my drift. Let's just be honest about that as well. So I always get that scene from Blue Chips, the best team that money can buy, that's Georgia, that's Georgia. There's no doubt about that. Here's one from Drunk Vigo. Do you guys like Chase Basantis, the offensive lineman he's at Bosco, right? Don Bosco Prep?
Yep, Don Bosco Prep here in New Jersey. Touched in with Chase. He just he just put out a top 15 ranking update on his schools yesterday for people that are into that top 15 type of thing, and Notre Dame is on it. I do like Chase. I actually prefer Chase, I think, on the interior because I think that there's a lot of natural power there. I'm not sure if I think he's the most fleet of foot or best foot quickness in the world, but I think that he is a very talented interior player potentially. Like he screams, and I'm not saying that he is this person, but like he reminds me a little bit of Tommy Kramer. So like take that with a grain of salt. Like I just don't think athletically
he would have been a really good player at Notre Dame if it wasn't for injuries.
Right. So I don't think that I just don't think that I think that you might start him off at tackle, but he's going to be a guy that just moved best inside because he's playing in short spaces. Like,
which makes that Tommy Kramer comp make a lot of sense. I mean, when Tommy started at right tackle on a Joe Moore award-winning team, but we always knew eventually he was going to move inside, right?
Sure.
And Tommy's best year was 2017 as a redshirt freshman. Yeah. He just was never healthy after that.
Sure.
And we talked about this the other day. He's now healthy and starting in the NFL, right? I mean, like it was, but so I that's a compliment. I want people to, that's a compliment because we understand Tommy's career was what it was because of injuries.
Yeah.
Before the injury set in, Tommy was a good football player.
I mean,
I still remember that block he had against Michigan State. People forget this too. I love they couldn't run the ball against good teams. In 2017, Michigan State had the number 2 rush defense in the country. Notre Dame went for over 180 yards on them, despite the fact Josh Adams got knocked out at halftime, Dexter Williams got knocked out of the game, and in the fourth quarter, they were rushing with Deion McIntosh. Tony Jones didn't even dress because he got hurt the week before against Boston College. They were down to Deion McIntosh and C.J. Holmes as their only running backs. They went for over $180 against the number 2 rush defense in the country. But I remember that long run Adams had in the first half. Tommy Kramer comes down, takes Kenny Willekes, drives him about 5-6 yards inside and just plants him.
Who's a good player, too.
Yeah.
Kenny Willekes was a good football player. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, Chase for me, like, there's some tenacity. I posted a clip of him a couple weeks ago on Twitter where, like, he is a nasty dude. So I think that he could be a really good player inside. I just don't know if he's going to last full time at tackle. But I do think that if we're recruiting him to play guard, I'm in on Chase Basantes, and he's got a great last name. It just rolls off the tongue. It's fantastic.
He's a Jersey kid, so I know you like that too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And he's the kind of kid Notre Dame's had success with in the past. You know, maybe a run blocking right tackle. If he can't play there, he becomes because his athleticism kind of takes a jump up at guard. Like, I'm not one of those people that thinks you can take an unathletic tackle and make him a guard and he's just going to also be great. You know, it's more, okay, this guy's a decent athlete, but he's not quite a space guy. Those are the guys that I want to move in to guard, and they can be really good guards. But I think his athleticism fits better and plays better. His demeanor fits better because he is at his best when he comes off and he's down blocking and he is driving you off the ball. You know, that is when Chase is at his best.
Temperament and play style.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple things here. We have a couple comments here that are along the same lines. Donnie Cruz, thank you, Donnie, says they need to stop pegging receivers into XYZ. These kids are smart Notre Dame students, move guys around and put the best 4 receivers, not Avery, just because he's a slot and not only big receivers in certain areas. I agree. Antoine Porcher-Rudeau also says Brian, CJ, and Malik mentioned on the II podcast that Kelly didn't use Fuller, Chase, Miles, EQ, T. Brown, and Boykin around the different spots. He just kept them at one receiver spot. Brother, you didn't need to wait to listen to Malik and CJ say that. We've been saying that for years, and I'm glad that the players are confirming now. And you know what's interesting? We're seeing more and more Notre Dame players come out and be vocal in criticizing Brian Kelly. This is the kind of stuff that I have heard for years behind the scenes, but they wouldn't say it publicly out of respect for Notre Dame. They didn't want to bash the current Notre Dame head football coach. They thought it was hurting the program that they care about. But there's a reason they're all kind of coming out now and being like, yeah, Van Gorder sucked, and yeah, Kelly wasn't this or not that. You know what I mean? Because he's not here anymore. You're not hurting the program by saying that anymore. But yeah, Antoine, I agree completely. And I agree with Donnie's question too, is I'm a big believer that you have to start kids somewhere, right? And you find the spot that they fit in best. And some kids are going to fit better in a spot over others. But yes, there needs to be at least 1 or 2 guys in your lineup that need to be able to move around. And even the guys that are, maybe a fit as a boundary guy, there's still other things you can do with them, moving them around. I mean, Chase Claypool, for example, he mentioned, Antoine mentioned the thing about Chase. They did move Chase Claypool around a lot during his career. It just was never at the same time. He started in 2017 as a slot. He started in 2018 as the X, and he started in 2019 as the W. But he never did them all at the same time. It was all like each different year they moved him to a different spot. Right. I don't think you can be that way and be an explosive offense anymore, in my opinion, unless guys are just phenomenal. Let me rephrase that. You can still be that, but you limit yourself to a degree when you're not willing to be more versatile. I won't say you can't be an elite offense because you can still be an elite offense. If you have elite players, you can be an elite offense.
Yep.
But I think you do limit yourself a little bit, especially when you play Bama and Georgia and Clemson, Ohio State. Because if my best player is Tobias Merriweather, for just as an example, and you always know where Tobias Merriweather is going to line up, it's going to make it a little bit easier to defend him. And now, as we saw with Will Fuller was phenomenal in 2015. But the couple games where he didn't really do a lot, 2 games, Clemson and Ohio State. Now, he had an 80-yard touchdown against Ohio State, but that was late in the game when it was like 38-21 and the game was in doubt and guy falls down. And all right, but the reason why is because Clemson and Ohio State knew exactly where Will Fuller was going to be, and they just threw their coverages at him and just stopped him with numbers and dared somebody else to make a play to beat him. And Notre Dame wasn't able to do that. And to me, when you're facing that situation, I need to be able to put Will in the boundary, in the slot, move him, do all those kind of things. And if you didn't already prepare to do that before the game, you're not just going to all of a sudden change your offense in the middle of a game because teams are stopping you. If you didn't practice it, right? It's not going to be successful. It needs to be a part of who you are. And that's absolutely what I want to see. No question about it. All right, let's get down to some more questions here before we get out of here. We do got to wrap up here pretty soon. Let me get a lot of love for Benjamin Morrison. I'm just now getting to the point where we were talking about the freshman corner.
Yeah.
A lot of love for Benjamin Morrison. Okay, here's one. Let me make sure I read this. All right, Nicholas Grosh. I'm gonna ask this for you, Ryan. Hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys could recruit everyone you wanted each year from high school and the portal, what kind of offense would you run and why? Thanks for all the great Notre Dame football talk.
Man, that's a loaded question. Well, if I'm recruiting everybody I want every year, then I'm gonna be as multiple as I want to be, right? Like I don't think that, kind of like what Brian was just talking about with receivers, I don't want to limit the ability, right? So like I'm gonna line up in gun, I'm gonna line up in pistol, I'm gonna line up under center, I'm gonna run some spread. I'm going to run power football. I'm going to run double tight. Like I have everything at the arsenal for me. So I don't want to be boring with my answer, but like I would like to think that I would be as multiple as possible because I'll have so many different skill sets to take advantage of, in my opinion. So I just think that there's endless possibilities if I'm getting players that I want every single year.
For me, I'm a pro style guy. I am. It's why I don't hammer. I have no problem with the type of offense that Tommy Rees wants to run. I think we saw it work phenomenally well with Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian at Alabama. Speaking of, if you can recruit whoever you want every year, I believe, however, that and I'm a big believer in this.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in diversity and multiplicity, but I like it more from a personnel standpoint than a schematic standpoint. I think at a place like Notre Dame, you can have some stuff, you can have some complexity to a degree. But I'm a big believer at this level of saying you're going to do 10 things, but you're going to do those 10 things at an elite level, as opposed to you're going to do 30 things and be good at all of them. You're going to do, because if I'm recruiting the players that I want, I'm going to have great players, right? And I want to make sure that those great players are also sound football players. And if I can have, you talk about just Notre Dame players. If my lineup is Everett Golson without George Whitfield and the suspension influence, or Deshaun Kaiser with the right attitude, whatever the case may be, or Tyler Buckner if he is what we think he is. And, at running back, I've got Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree, and at receiver, I've got Will Fuller at X, and I've got Michael Floyd at W, and, I've got Chase Claypool in the slot or whatever the case may be, and I got Michael Mayer at tight end or Tyler Eifert if I want to go 12 personnel, whatever the case may be. I got a lot of options, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to run 50 plays to show everyone how smart I am. We're going to do 10 to 12 things, and we're going to do those 10 to 12 things really, really well. And then we're going to do them out of 25 different looks. So I'm more of less scheme, more diversity of how you look, and because that can make it very hard for team. That's like if you go back and watch Alabama last year, they were not an incredibly deep pass offense in regards to what had 50 different schemes they use. I mean, they use some of the same stuff just over and over and over again. They got complex with their RPO game, but I mean, a lot of stuff they run, you just kind of see it every week. It's just one play Devontae runs it out of Z. Next play they run it with Devontae as the X, and he's he's now the decoy. The next play he's boundary, and he's the number one guy. They didn't run a million different plays. They had some complexity, but they were just really fundamentally sound, well coached, and they knew how to scheme for success. And that's kind of, it would look a lot like that. And I think the one reason I probably am not as hard on Tommy Rees as maybe I should, because I see a lot of people hard on him, is because I think in a lot of ways he and I have similar ideas on what kind of offense to run. I would be more college oriented where he wants to be more pro oriented. That's the difference of opinion, but pro style 11, 12 personnel, some 12, some 21 or 20 personnel. I want to run the football. I'm a big believer in running the football, but running the football with an explosive passing game. I'm an RPO guy, that kind of thing. And I prefer the pro style spread to the college spread and the air raid any day of the week if the personnel fits. I think the air raid is sort of the modern triple option. It is a bit of an equalizer when you don't have as good of players as the guys next to you. I think if you have the better players, I think a pro-style spread is the thing that I personally think is the best offense if you can have the right players. That's my 2 cents on that. But one thing we both have in common, got to be able to do a lot of different things. You just can't – you're not just going to line up and – because if we're going to say, hey, I can recruit an all-star team, okay, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? But if we're being realistic, you're always going to have really good players, but you're never going to have an all-star everywhere. I mean, like last year, Devontae Smith, a phenomenal player. They also had Slade Bolden in the starting lineup, right? So they weren't elite everywhere. They had Emil Ekafor in the starting lineup. Nice player. To me, he's not a first-round type of guy. I don't see that anyway.
No. They had Chris Owens starting at right tackle, who's a center.
So. There you go. Yeah. And he was starting at center against Notre Dame last year.
Right.
And because they had lost Landon Dickinson.
And he's a 6'3" guy with, like Brockermeyer and a couple other more talented guys on the bench. So JC Latham. So I'm going to
try to find 5 more and we're going to get out of here. Here's good from Kevon, right? I'm going to let you answer this one. An offense, this is really comment. An offense built around Tyler Buckner, Chris Tyree, Braden Lindsey, and Lorenzo Styles will be explosive. I can't wait to see what we put on the field next year. And then here's the question that kind of goes with it. What would your scheme with Buckner look like? I personally do not like more than 5 design runs a game. What are your thoughts, gentlemen? I'm going to give you first crack at that, Ryan.
I would almost have a read off of almost every single run, to be honest with you. Not every single one. Like there's going to be some design gives, but like we're going to run a spread. We're going to have some zone options off of it. We're going to have some power options off of it. I'm going to have some quarterback run game involved in there from quarterback power perspective. So we're going to be running zone read. We're going to be running power read. Okay, we're going to be running some RPO action off of it. We're going to have some guys, especially guys like Lorenzo Styles that you mentioned, Braden Lindsey, like they're going to be running arrow routes and quick stuff off of the action. We're going to be running some bubble screen. Like I want multiple options almost off of every look. So that's kind of what because I think that's where Tyler Buckner hurts you, right? Because at the end of the day, football is a numbers game, and these type of option football gives you numbers advantage if you read it correctly. So that's just as simple as possible. We're going to be running a lot of different option looks and a lot of different options off of it. So
I think for me, if you don't have some sort of run or pass read with Tyler Buckner on 75 to 85% of your throws, I still don't agree with that. Now, not all those reads are runs. Some of those reads are going to be you're running inside zone and he's pulling and throwing the bubble like he did for a touchdown pass against North Carolina.
Yep.
So that's just where football's going. And when you have a quarterback that can be sort of the triple threat that Tyler Buckner is, and triple threat, in my opinion, is a guy that can throw the ball, a guy that can run the ball, and a guy that can make plays with his legs in the throwing game. That's the triple threat for me as a quarterback. I think Tyler can do all those things. I mean, he can throw off platform, go watch the touchdown pass to Chris Tyree. He just kind of, just throws that thing over the top, just like you think he's going to run, and all of a sudden he just pulls up those top 55 yards down. He can do those kind of things. He can make those kind of plays. And so I think when I think of designed runs, what I don't want to have is 8 to 10 designed runs where you're running quarterback power with him. Mm-hmm. Sure. You're running quarterback outside zone 8 to 10 times. What y'all have to understand is read zone, if you're doing it right and he's making the right decisions, he's not taking a bunch of hits on that, because he's giving. If there's any doubt that he's going to be running into 2 linebackers, he should be giving that ball or throwing it. If you look at power read, if he's reading it right, he's kind of running through a crease. It's not it's just not downhill. You're not taking the beating that you're getting when it's those other things. And so those are a little different for me than a designed run where it's quarterback power and you're in 12 personnel and he's just snapping it and stepping and going and doing the Tim Tebow thing, right? That's a different animal than what I think you're going to have him do. But I think the scheme with Tyler Buckner is going to look different next year. Again, we talked about this before Ryan got on the show, is don't assume that what we saw from him in 2021 is what they want to do with him moving forward. There was a reason they did a limited package with him. I think we're going to see a lot of quick game. I want to see the pocket getting moved. I think if you're not moving the pocket with Tyler Buckner in the throwing game, I don't think you're doing it right. That means sprint outs. It means half rolls. It means, because to me, the sprint out action to me is huge because you're getting him in space where he can do something with his arm, but now you've got him in space to run. Number two, teams are going to be so worried about that part of his game that all of a sudden, I guarantee you're going to hit 3 or 4 big sprint draws for big gains in the run game, right? It sets up other opportunities, throwback. I mean, that's part of the game too, right? Is I'm doing this because I think we can have some success, but I'm also setting up this thing because they're a real undisciplined backside team against sprint out, and they tend to go over. So we're going to do a delay and throw back to, our tight end like Notre Dame did with Alize Mack in 2018, and Chip Long did that with Braden Lindsey in 2019, except Ian Book threw it at his ankle. But if he doesn't throw it at his ankle against Virginia Tech in 2019, Braden catches that thing, and it's a 60-yard touchdown, right? So, you see those things. But if you all of a sudden if you just start sprinting out in one game, they're not going to react to it as much as if they've been preparing for it all week. It tends to be that way. So that's what it would look like for me, but it's still going to look like what it looked like this year. It's just there's a little bit more quarterback. I mean, they ran read zone with Jack Cohn this year. Don't know why. At least let me rephrase. They ran read zone action, which I thought was kind of silly because everyone in the stadium knew he wasn't pulling it. So they were never collapsing the backside. I mean, they were never not collapsing the backside. It's just kind of dumb. And it's why it worked when Tyler Buckner got in there. But if they were calling those plays with Jack Cohn, they're going to run them next year.
For sure.
And I think that's a good thing. And that's an offense that Harry Hiestand has coached before. I mean, the offense hasn't changed a whole lot since Harry Hiestand was here in the run game. It hasn't. And he'll make a quick transition. I think it's the throwing game that, to me, is what I'm curious to see from Tyler's. I think the big thing for me is they're going to have to figure out ways to get the deep ball going with him because he doesn't have that, at least I haven't seen it, that 60-yard over-the-top cannon arm. We haven't seen that yet. It's about hit your drop and let it rip for 40 to 50. It's read that backside seam and throw that zip because he gets pretty good zip on the ball from 25 and in. And so I think those are some areas we're going to have to be able to manufacture some big plays unless his arm's better than I think it is on the downfield ball. If that's the case, then, that's great, but we haven't seen that yet. I have a super chat here. If quarterback development continues to be poor, are you willing to look at bringing in a dedicated QB coach or fire Tommy and get a new OC?
I mean, something has to change, right? If it's not getting any better, I don't want to really speculate what the change would be, but there has to be something different. Like, we're not just going to keep aimlessly doing the same thing over and over again if it's not working. So whether that is bringing in another quarterback coach to work with Coach Reese and develop the position, that would be something I'm up for, especially if Tommy Reese is calling a good game, if he's putting together good game plans. Like, maybe we departmentalize and we let a quarterback coach come in. Yeah. But I mean, to answer your question, there has to be some type of change. Absolutely.
I guess part of me, I don't necessarily accept the premise of the question. I don't think quarterback development has been poor throughout Tommy Reese's tenure. And I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from is Tommy's not the one that didn't develop Brandon Wimbush. Malik Zaire, Everett Golson, Deshaun Kaiser. That's not on Tommy Reese. That's on Brian Kelly. And as I said before, I think that Tommy actually did a pretty good job getting the most out of Ian Book that he can get out of Ian Book. I just don't think there was a lot of there. I mean, with Ian, I don't think he had the mind to be a quarterback better than what he was. Physical tools, sure. But I don't care what your physical tools are. If you don't have the mind for the game, you're not going to be successful. And I think people need to understand that. Jack Cohn, to me, the longer he was with Tommy, the better he got. And doing so with a poor offensive line and not much of a help from a receiver coaching standpoint. So I don't think the quarterback development has been poor under Tommy. I think it was poor under Brian Kelly. I think that's projected onto Tommy, in my opinion. Now, did he screw up with Phil Dracovic? Yeah, he did. Right? But he never got to the point where he could develop Phil because he left soon because of Tommy. That's what makes this year so important. If we don't see Tyler make a jump, then I do think it would be more fair to do that. But I don't think it's been poor. I also don't think Tommy Reese is going to let anyone else coach quarterbacks. So if you're going to bring in a new quarterbacks coach, it basically means you're bringing in a new OC. But at the end of the day, look, I think Tommy's going to do a really good job this year. If I'm wrong, then you have to consider finding someone else. It's because it's not personal, right? I mean, you're trying to win championships. And if he can't develop an explosive offense and if he can't develop a quarterback, what are we doing here? Why are you here? Like, it's like that scene from Office Space. What would you say you do here? You know what I mean? Because it's not like you're recruiting elite quarterbacks. That's the other thing. This next year is huge for Tommy Rees. He's got to show that he can recruit a top quarterback. He's got to show he can develop a top quarterback. And he's got to show that he's got the chops to be an elite offensive coordinator. I'm actually cautiously optimistic about all three. We'll find out, but I'm cautiously optimistic about all three. Got a super sticker from K Grant. Appreciate that. Gregory Gilbert. Brian, can I get a I do declare from you? Yes, you can. Very much. Have you missed my Southern accent? Is that the problem, Gregory? Do you miss my BK trolling with the Southern accent? But yes, I mean, I grew up with those cartoons, so I know how to do I do declare well, I think, get that Savannah accent going. So I think that's couple real quick here. Kenny Moore says Tyree is going to have a huge year with Harry Hiestand back. I agree with you. Spartan B88, is Notre Dame going to land another 2022 receiver in the final thing? Ryan, you say no. I say no. Correct? Both say no.
Yeah, I don't see a guy right now. No. So
I still say the guy they need recruits in safety form right now. And of course, as Benjamin says, like and subscribe, everyone. Thanks for everything you all do. Brian, Vince, Sean, and Ryan. So close to 10,000. Hashtag IB Nation. Yes. I appreciate that very much, my friend. Very, very much. Ryan, you were here with us a long time, man. I know today you got a lot. Your daughter's birthday was yesterday, correct? Right?
Yep.
So I know you got a lot going on. I appreciate you being with me today, man. I couldn't get to everybody's questions. We had a lot of great questions, a lot of great comments. I appreciate all of you so much. Appreciate you all being with us today. Appreciate the super chats. Appreciate the other questions. Appreciate the engagement. Appreciate how big of a crowd we had today. Make sure you're locked into irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the message boards, everybody. You can also get links to the merch store down below so you can rock some of this Irish Breakdown gear that we're rocking. All this, the flag, all of it is in the merch store. We've got some new gear in there. They don't sell tracksuits, everybody. I tried to find the Mafia tracksuits. They just don't sell them at Printful, so they're not an option for me right now. If you like power bars, I'm going to be having one of these Built bars after the show. I'm going to be rocking this sucker here after the show because I'm flipping starving. They're tremendous. This is
they're delicious.
This is the coconut and almond one. You get 10% off if you use the Irish Breakdown promo code. The link is in the description box below. If you use that, you get 10% off your entire purchase. So you definitely want to check that out. And of course, make sure that you come back and check us out. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell, share our show, and come back and join us again tomorrow. So thanks everybody for listening and watching the Irish Breakdown podcast.